The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue over the city park on an early autumn evening in late September. The sky was a breathtaking canvas of purples and deep blues, streaked with the last fleeting traces of daylight. A gentle breeze whispered through the trees, stirring the leaves into a soft, rustling chorus that blended with the distant laughter of children spilling from the playground. Couples strolled hand in hand, their footsteps a steady, unhurried rhythm on the winding paths, while families lounged on blankets under the soft glow of streetlights, savoring the fleeting peace of the day's end. The air carried the faint scent of damp earth and fading summer flowers, a tranquil refuge that seemed to cradle the soul, shielding it from the chaos of the world beyond. At the heart of this serene scene stood Ellie Taylor, a towering figure of strength and grace, her dark skin catching the fading light as she watched over her 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Ellie's broad shoulders and steady stance spoke of a life forged through adversity, her eyes sharp with a quiet, unyielding determination. Beside her, Lily radiated the boundless energy of youth, her curly hair neatly styled into tight coils that bounced with every movement. Her wide, luminous eyes sparkled with a mix of curiosity and adoration as she gazed up at her mother, her lips curving into a smile that warmed the crisp evening air. To Lily, Ellie wasn't just a she was a titan, a beacon of courage and love who had weathered storms Lily could only imagine. This night was sacred, a rare pause in the relentless tide of Ellie's responsibilities. Work, bills, and the weight of raising a child alone had stretched her thin. But tonight she'd carved out this time for Lily. Her daughter had recently fallen in love with skateboarding, mesmerized by videos of young skaters soaring through city streets, defying gravity with every trick. Ellie saw the flicker of passion in Lily's eyes and seized it, not just to teach her the mechanics of the sport, but to pass down something deeper, lessons of balance, bravery, and resilience that had carried Ellie through her own turbulent youth. Skateboarding had once been her escape, a way to glide over the cracked sidewalks and pothole-riddled streets of her childhood neighborhood, where every wobble tested her grit. Now, watching Lily step onto the board, Ellie felt a swell of pride tinged with nostalgia. "Ease onto it, Lily," Ellie instructed, her voice a soothing blend of firmness and tenderness. "Keep your knees soft, don't lock up. If you start to tip, don't fight it. Just let go. I'll be right here." She stood close, her hands hovering just out of reach, ready to catch her daughter if she faltered. Lily glanced up, her brow furrowed with concentration, but her eyes gleamed with trust. "I've got this, Mom," she said, her voice quivering slightly as she tried to mask her nerves. For Lily, this was more than a lesson in skateboarding. It was a chance to prove she could stand tall, just like the woman she idolized. Each time she balanced for a few shaky seconds, Ellie's face lit up, her laughter ringing out like a melody against the evening's calm. "That's my girl. Stay steady. Sweetheart, you've got it." Beneath her warm smile, though, Ellie's senses remained razor-sharp. She'd grown up in a world that demanded vigilance, a neighborhood where every shadow could hide a threat, every glance a judgment. The scars of those years soft being dismissed, harassed, or worse because of her skin etched themselves into her memory. A constant reminder that peace was fragile. Even here, in this idyllic park, she couldn't fully let her guard down, not with Lily by her side. Her eyes flicked instinctively to the edges of the scene, scanning the faces and movements around them, a habit born of survival. Lily climbed onto the board again, her tongue poking out in focus as she wobbled forward. Ellie's mind drifted briefly to her own youth, to the hours she'd spent mastering her balance on streets that seemed designed to trip her up. Back then, the board had been her shield, her defiance against a world that tried to box her in. Now, seeing Lily inherit that same spark, Ellie felt a quiet triumph. Her daughter's determination mirrored her own, a thread of resilience woven through generations. She was lost in that thought, savoring the small victory of Lily's progress, when a chill crept up her spine. A figure emerged from the lengthening shadows, his silhouette stark against the soft glow of the park. The man moved with a rigid, deliberate stride, his police uniform unmistakable even from a distance. Ellie's stomach tightened as recognition dawned at Richard Copeland. His name was a bitter whisper in the neighborhood, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm cloud. Stories of his arrogance and cruelty had festered for years, tales of unwarranted stops, harsh words, and hands too quick to punish. To Ellie, he was more than a rumor. He was a living symbol of the injustices she'd fought to rise above. Her muscles tensed, but she forced her face to remain calm, unwilling to let Lily sense the shift. Copeland was a relic of a bygone era, a 20-year veteran of the force who'd long abandoned any pretense of serving the public. His uniform, once a badge of authority, now hung on him like a shroud, stained by the bitterness that had curdled inside him. Life hadn't unfolded as he'd planned. Promotions had passed him by. Respect had eroded. He'd turned that resentment outward, especially toward those he deemed beneath him. Black families like Ellie's bore the brunt of his scorn, their very presence an affront to the world he thought he deserved. As he approached, his boots thudded against the pavement, each step a declaration of his imagined dominion. Ellie straightened, her hand brushing the edge of her jacket as she steadied herself. "What do you think you're doing here?" Copeland's voice sliced through the stillness, sharp and cold as a winter wind. His eyes, narrowed with disdain, locked onto hers. Ellie met his gaze unflinchingly, her voice even despite the fire simmering within. "I'm teaching my daughter to skateboard. We're just spending time in the park." Her words were simple, a shield of reason against his aggression, but they did nothing to thaw the ice in his expression. "This place isn't for people like you," he sneered, his tone heavy with venom. "It's for families, decent folks who belong here, not for you to come and disturb the peace." The words landed like blows, striking at wounds Ellie had spent years learning to endure. She felt the sting, the familiar ache of being reduced to an outsider in a space that was hers by right. But she held her ground, her voice steady as stone. "This park is public. We have every right to be here, same as anyone else." Behind her, Lily's skateboard clattered softly as she abandoned her practice, her small frame shrinking closer to Ellie. Confusion clouded her bright eyes, her hands clutching at her mother's sleeve as she tried to make sense of the man's hostility. The air thickened with tension, an invisible weight pressing down on them both. Copeland took a step closer, his towering frame looming as he invaded Ellie's space, his breath sour with contempt. "People like you always think you can do whatever you want," he spat. "I've seen it too many times. You think I don't know what you're really up to?" Ellie's jaw clenched, her fingers curling into fists at her sides as she fought the tide of anger rising in her chest. She knew men like Copeland into Madeline, not just him, but the type, power-hungry, brittle souls who thrived on breaking others down. He didn't just want obedience. He wanted her to cower, to shrink beneath his glare. But Ellie had never been one to bend. She'd faced worse than him, years of slights, threats, and systems stacked against her, and she'd emerged stronger each time. "I don't know what you're implying," she said, her voice low but laced with steel. "But we're not here to cause trouble. We're just living our lives." The confrontation was no longer just a clash of words. It was a battle of wills, a microcosm of the broader fight Ellie had waged her whole life. Copeland's presence was a reminder of how fragile justice could be, how quickly power could twist into tyranny when wielded by the wrong hands. Yet in that moment, Ellie felt something shift inside her, a resolve not just to endure, but to resist. This wasn't about her alone. It was about Lily, about the future her daughter deserved. To stay silent would be to let Copeland's version of the world win, to let him dictate who belonged and who didn't. As the tension hung heavy, the park's tranquility seemed to mock the scene unfolding. The laughter from the playground faded into a distant hum, the breeze carrying away the last vestiges of peace. Ellie's mind raced, weighing her next move. She could feel Lily trembling beside her, the girl's innocence colliding with a reality Ellie had hoped to shield her from. Copeland's sneer widened, emboldened by her silence, but he'd underestimated the fire within her. This wasn't just a fleeting insult, it was a spark, igniting a deeper reckoning. Ellie's story wasn't one of victimhood. It was a testament to the unshakable belief that justice, when fought for, could topple even the most entrenched abuses of power. And in that quiet park, under the fading autumn sky, she was ready to prove it. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the sprawling public park, its sprawling lawns dotted with towering oaks, and winding paths bustling with the quiet hum of families enjoying the day. Ellie Taylor stood near a cracked concrete walkway, her posture relaxed yet attentive, guiding her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, as the girl wobbled atop a scratched-up skateboard. Ellie's voice carried a soothing cadence, calm yet resolute, as she encouraged Lily's tentative movements. "We're not hurting a soul out here," she said, her words steady and firm, though laced with an undercurrent of defiance she couldn't quite suppress. "I'm just showing my little girl how to find her balance. We're not stirring up trouble or stepping on anyone's toes." Her dark eyes flickered with quiet determination, a mother's instinct to protect shimmering beneath her composed exterior. But that fragile peace splintered when Officer Richard Copeland swaggered into view, his heavy boots thudding against the pavement with deliberate menace. His lips twisted into a sneer, a cruel crescent that betrayed his disdain before he even opened his mouth. "Oh, I bet skateboarding's all you're up to," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery as his gaze raked over Ellie and Lily. "Starting her young, huh? Teaching her to thumb her nose at the rules already. Real classy." The sarcasm in his tone was a blade, sharp and meant to cut, but Ellie didn't flinch. Beside her, Lily's small frame quaked, her wide eyes darting between her mother and the towering figure looming closer. Ellie felt the tremor in her daughter's grip and rested a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder, a wordless promise of safety amid the storm brewing before them. Inside, Ellie's heart thuded of fears, protective rhythm, but her face remained a mask of calm. She wouldn't let this man's venom seep into her daughter's world, not if she could help it. Yet she also knew silence wasn't an option. His taunts demanded a response. "You've got no business harassing us like this," Ellie said, her voice low but unyielding, each syllable a brick in the wall she built against his aggression. "We haven't crossed any lines. If you've got a problem, call your backup or talk to my lawyer, see what they think." Her words hung in the air, crisp and deliberate, a challenge wrapped in reason. For a fleeting moment, Copeland blinked, caught off guard by her steady resolve. But the flicker of surprise only stoked the fire smoldering in his narrowed eyes. "You think you're slick, huh?" he spat, stepping closer, his broad shoulders casting a shadow that swallowed the fading sunlight. "Standing here like you own the place. I've handled plenty like you before, troublickers who don't know their place." Across the park, beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient tree, Mary Jenkins sat perched on a weathered wooden bench, her silver hair glinting like a halo in the soft light. Her wrinkled hands fidgeted in her lap, twisting the hem of her faded cardigan as she watched the confrontation unfold. Her kind eyes, framed by deep lines of a life well lived, clouded with unease. She'd seen her share of petty squabbles in this park over the years, but this felt different, darker, heavier. Copeland's raised voice carried across the grass, prickling her skin with discomfort. Yet she hesitated, her frail legs trembling beneath her as she debated whether to step in. She wanted to believe in fairness, in the goodness of people. But the raw edge in Copeland's tone gnawed at her faith, leaving her torn between fear and a quiet urge to act. Ellie squared her shoulders, her gaze locked on Copeland's, unflinching even as his hostility crackled like static between them. "If you think we don't belong here, that's your burden to carry, not mine," she said, her voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. "I don't owe you a single word of explanation." Her defiance was a spark, igniting the air with a palpable charge, and it only seemed to enrage Copeland further. He lurched forward, closing the distance until Ellie could smell the stale tang of tobacco clinging to his crisp uniform, a sour note that turned her stomach. His eyes burned with something feral, a mix of rage and entitlement that made Lily clutch her mother's hand tighter, her small fingers digging into Ellie's palm. Ellie's chest tightened, not from fear of Copeland himself, but from the dread of what Lily might see if this spiraled further. She forced herself to breathe evenly, her composure a shield for her daughter's sake. At the edge of the scene, Mary Jenkins finally rose from her bench, her movements slow and uncertain, as if her body wrestled with her resolve. Her thin frame swayed slightly, her eyes darting between Copeland's imposing figure and Ellie's steadfast stance. She took a tentative step forward, then froze, her lips parting in a silent gasp as doubt anchored her in place. She'd always prided herself on speaking up when it mattered, but now, faced with the raw power radiating from Copeland, her courage faltered. leaving her a reluctant spectator to the unfolding drama. "Don't push me, Miss Taylor," Copeland growled, his voice sinking to a guttural snarl that sent a shiver down Lily's spine. "I'll show you who's in charge, Harry'll see." His breath was hot and ragged, his chest heaving as he loomed over Ellie, a predator sizing up its prey. But Ellie didn't waver. She stood tall, her eyes boring into his with a quiet ferocity, though inside a tempest of emotions churned danger, fear, and a steely determination to protect her child. Lily pressed herself against her mother's side, her small hands clutching the fabric of Ellie's coat as if it were a lifeline. Ellie squeezed her daughter's hand gently, a silent vow that she wouldn't let this man break them. She knew all too well how quickly someone like Copeland could tip the scales from intimidation to violence, and that knowledge fueled her resolve to stay steady. "You don't get it, do you?" Copeland barked, his voice rising as he took another menacing step forward. "This isn't your playground. People like you don't get to stand here like you belong, acting like no one's gonna call you out. Who do you think you are?" His contempt was a living thing, coiling around his words. But Ellie had faced this kind of venom before too many times to count. It stung, yes, but today was different. Today, Lily's wide, frightened eyes watched her every move, and Ellie couldn't will to let her daughter see her crumble. She drew a deep breath, her voice slicing through the air like a honed blade. "I don't think you know this is a public park, and I've got every right to be here. Same as anyone else, you don't get to decide otherwise." Lily's trembling grew more pronounced, her small frame huddling closer to her mother's legs. "Mom, can we just go home?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread fraying under the weight of her fear. Ellie's heart ached at the sound, but she knelt briefly, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's tear-streaked face. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, her tone soft yet unshakable. "We're fine, I promise." Rising again, she met Copeland's glare head-on, her refusal to bend only deepening the scowl etched across his face. He edged closer still, now just inches away, his voice dropping to a low, menacing rumble. "You've got some nerve, Taylor. Do you even know who you're mouthing off to? I could make your life hell in a heartbeat." Ellie's pulse quickened, but her expression remained a fortress of calm. She remembered her mother's lessons from years ago, spoken in a kitchen bathed in morning light. "No one's got the right to touch you without your say-so, Ellie. If they try, you stand your ground, you fight back." Those words pulsed in her mind now, a beacon guiding her through the haze of Copeland's threats. She positioned herself more firmly between him and Lily, a human barrier against his looming presence. In the distance, unnoticed by the trio, a stranger in a faded hoodie slipped a phone from their pocket, the tiny lens capturing every heated word and tense gesticulation's bristling aggression. Ellie's quiet strength and Lily's huddled feral preserved in silent testimony. Then, without warning, Copeland's hand shot up, a blur of motion that made Ellie's entire body coil with instinctual dread. Before she could react, his palm cracked against her cheek with a force that reverberated through the stillness of the park, a sharp, stinging slap that shattered the evening's fragile calm. Lily's scream pierced the air, a raw, terrified wail that sliced through Ellie's chest like a shard of glass. "Mom," the girl cried, lunging forward to wrap her arms around her mother's waist, her tear-filled eyes searching Ellie's face in panic. "Are you okay?" Ellie stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her cheek where a blazing heat bloomed, the pain a wildfire racing across her skin. But she swallowed it down, forcing her breathing to steady as she met Lily's gaze with a reassuring softness. "I'm okay, baby," she said, her voice a lifeline despite the throbbing ache radiating from the blow. "I'm fine." Copeland stood there, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, his face flushed a deep crimson. A twisted smirk curled his lips, a grotesque mask of triumph, as if he'd just delivered some righteous verdict. "Let that teach you," he sneered, his voice thick with disdain. "Maybe now you'll figure out where you stand." Ellie straightened, her cheeks still burning, but her eyes gleamed with a defiance sharper than ever. Lily clung to her coat, her small hands shaking yet refusing to let go, a silent testament to her trust in her mother's strength. The sting of Copeland's strike fueled Ellie's resolve, a fire kindled not just by pain, but by the glaring injustice of it all. She knew this wasn't just about Hera, it was about every moment someone like Copeland wielded power to crush instead of protect. Copeland's smugness faltered as Ellie held her ground, her silence more powerful than any retort. "Who do you think you are, defying me like this?" he roared, stepping closer again, his voice a thunderclap of rage. Ellie didn't blink. She glanced down at Lily, her eyes softening with a promise. "Sweetheart, stay behind me," she said gently. "Don't be scared, I've got you." Lily nodded, her tear-streaked face glowing with a flicker of awe as she looked up at her mother, seeing not just a protector but a pillar unbroken by the storm. Copeland's eyes narrowed, his frustration boiling over at Ellie's unshaken poise. "You're too full of yourself, Taylor," he snarled, his tone a venomous hiss. "You don't even know who you're messing with. I can ruin you." The air thrummed with tension, thick and electric, as Ellie stood her ground. The lessons of justice her mother had instilled in her strength in the face of tyranny. The courage to demand respect burned brightly within her. Copeland's abuse of power wasn't just a personal affront. It was a stark reminder of the consequences when authority turned predator. As he raised his hand again, poised as if to strike or seize her, Ellie braced herself, her mind racing with the weight of what might come next, but certain of one truth: she'd never let him win. Not while Lily watched, and not while the world still held a shred of justice worth fighting for. The air crackled with tension as Ellie's instincts surged to life. With a swift, graceful sidestep, her body moved like water smooth and deliberating the advancing figure of Officer Taylor. Copeland. Her quick maneuver threw him off balance, his heavy boots scuffing the dirt as he stumbled, a flicker of bewilderment crossing his rugged face. That brief moment of confusion was all Ellie needed. Her muscles tensed, coiled like a spring, as she repositioned herself, every nerve alight with purpose. She wasn't just reacting, she was preparing, her stance a silent vow to protect what mattered most. Copeland's lapse only stoked the fire of his rage, his broad shoulders heaving as he regained his footing, eyes narrowing into slits of fury. "You think you can dodge me forever?" he bellowed, his voice a thunderclap that reverberated through the park. His gaze burned with unchecked anger, the kind that simmered too long and now boiled over, scorching everything in its path. Ellie didn't flinch. She kept her distance, her body a living shield between Copeland and her daughter, Lily, who stood trembling just behind her. "I told you," Ellie said, her voice low but unyielding, each syllable weighted with resolve. "You're not laying a hand on us." Her words hung in the air, steady and unshakable, anchoring the chaotic moment with her quiet strength. From a distance, a lone bystander held up a phone, the tiny lens capturing every jagged edge of the confrontation. The device trembled slightly in their hands, but they didn't falter each shout, each defiant gesture preserved in stark clarity. The camera became a silent witness, documenting Copeland's aggression and Ellie's unwavering resistance, the footage a growing testament to a truth too raw to ignore. The tension thickened with every heartbeat, a storm brewing in the space between them. Copeland sneered, his lips twisting into a cruel mockery. "You're defying a police officer," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain, as if the badge pinned to his chest granted him dominion over her very existence. Ellie's lips curled into a faint, rebellious smile, a spark of defiance igniting in her chest. "No," she shot back, her eyes blazing with a fire that matched his own. "You're the one who'll regret this. That badge doesn't give you the right to harass us, to threaten us, or to hurt us. You've crossed a line, and I'm not letting it slide." Her words were a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge that pierced through his bravado and struck at the core of his authority. Her defiance only fueled Copeland's fury. With a guttural roar, he lunged again, his massive frame barreling toward her like a runaway freight train. But Ellie was ready, her reflexes sharp, her mind clear. She stepped back with the agility of a dancer, widening the gap between them, her hand darting out to guide Lily further behind her. "Stay back," she murmured to her daughter, her tone soft but urgent, laced with a mother's fierce love. Lily obeyed, her wide eyes peeking out from behind Ellie's legs, her small hands clutching the fabric of her mother's jeans. "Stay still," Copeland barked, his face flushed a deep crimson, veins bulging at his temples as his temper spiraled beyond control. Ellie didn't answer with words this time. She stood tall, her gaze locked onto his, unblinking and fierce, a silent dare that spoke louder than any shout. Inside, her heart pounded a wild, relentless drumbeat, but she refused to let it show. "I will protect my daughter at all costs," she declared, her voice cutting through the chaos with the clarity of a bell. It wasn't just a statement, it was a promise etched into the very marrow of her being. By now, the scene had drawn a small crowd, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path as they edged closer. Pulled in by the magnetic pull of the unfolding drama, their presence shifted the air, creating an unspoken boundary that hemmed Copeland in. He couldn't ignore them, their watchful eyes, their murmured whispers weaving a net of scrutiny around him. His power, once absolute in his mind, began to fray at the edges. "Stop this right now." The command sliced through the heavy silence, sharp and unyielding. Heads turned as Mary Jenkins stepped forward, her frail frame belying the steel in her voice. The elderly woman had been perched on a nearby bench, her wrinkled hands folded in her lap, watching the scene unfold with growing dismay. Now, she rose, her silver hair catching the sunlight, her eyes alight with indignation. "I've seen everything," she said, her tone resolute, "and you have no right to treat them like this." Her words carried the weight of a lifetime, each one a pebble dropped into the still waters of the confrontation, rippling outward. Copeland whirled toward her, his irritation flaring like a struck match. "Who do you think you are, old woman, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong?" he snapped, but there was a tremor in his voice, a crack in the armor of his confidence. Mary didn't waver. She straightened her spine, her gaze steady and piercing, a quiet courage radiating from her weathered face. Ellie seized the moment, her eyes boring into Copeland's. "You should leave," she said, her voice firm and edged with warning, "before this gets worse for you. And trust me, you'll answer for what you've done." Her words weren't a threat, they were a certainty, a reckoning she intended to see through. For a fleeting second, Copeland froze, his gaze darting between Ellie, Lily, and the swelling crowd. Then, with a snarl of frustration, he stepped back, his eyes smoldering with a rage he couldn't unleash. "This isn't over," he growled, his voice a low rumble of menace. Before turning on his heel and storming off, his boots pounding the earth with every furious step, Ellie let out a long, shuddering breath, the weight of the encounter easing from her shoulders like a storm cloud passing overhead. She dropped to her knees, pulling Lily into her arms, her hands trembling as they cradled her daughter's small frame. "It's over, baby," she whispered, her voice softening into a tender lullaby. "We're okay now." Lily buried her face in Ellie's chest, her quiet sobs muffled against her mother's heartbeat. Ellie held her tighter, her own eyes stinging with unshed tears as she watched Copeland's retreating figure, his silhouette a mix of anger and arrogance against the fading light. In the distance, the bystanders slipped their phone into their pocket, their jaw set with determination. That video wasn't just a recording, it was a weapon, a beacon of truth that could illuminate the shadows of injustice. Ellie's gaze lingered on Copeland's back, a knot of unease tightening in her gut. She knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a battle she hadn't chosen, but wouldn't back down from. Before she could sink deeper into that thought, a deep, commanding voice cut through the stillness of the park. "Stop right there, Officer Copeland." The words rang out with an authority that demanded attention, pulling every eye toward their source. A tall man strode forward, his presence slicing through the tension like a blade. In his 40s, with salt and pepper hair combed neatly back and eyes that pierced like twin daggers, he carried a small briefcase in one hand. But it wasn't the briefcase that drew gasps, it was the aura of unshakable confidence that surrounded him, a force that seemed to bend the very air. Derek Owens was no stranger to scenes like this, a civil rights attorney renowned for championing the powerless against the powerful. He was a name whispered in fear by those who twisted justice for their own ends. His reputation preceded him, a relentless advocate, a hunter of accountability who struck dread into the hearts of officers like Copeland. He moved with purpose, each step measured, his sharp gaze fixed on the retreating officer. Copeland halted mid-stride, his shoulders stiffening as he turned to face this new challenger. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered across his face before hardening into a scowl. "Who are you?" he barked, his voice straining to reclaim control. "This doesn't concern you." Owens closed the distance between them, unflinching. "I think it does," he replied, his tone calm but laced with an iron resolve that made the air feel heavier. I've been watching from afar, and what I've seen is a police officer abusing his power, intimidating a woman and her child, threatening them with violence. Do you think that's within the law? Ellie looked up at Owens, her breath catching in her throat. Surprise mingled with gratitude in her chest, a fragile hope taking root. She didn't know this man, but his presence was a lifeline, a sudden shift in the tide. Lily, still pressed against her mother, stopped trembling. Her curiosity piqued as she peeked out at the towering figure. Copeland cleared his throat, squaring his shoulders in a desperate bid to regain his footing. I was doing my job, he said, his voice tight with forced bravado. This woman was causing a disturbance, and I handled it. A disturbance? Owen's lips twitched into a faint, incredulous smile, his eyes glinting with disbelief. Striking a woman in front of her daughter, that's your protocol? You think your badge makes you untouchable, lets you act like some thug in uniform? The crowd pressed closer, their murmurs growing louder, their stares pinning Copeland in place. His discomfort was palpable now, sweat beading on his brow as his grip on the situation slipped through his fingers. I don't need a lecture from you, Copeland snapped, his voice rising in a defensive crescendo. My job is to keep order, and I've got the authority to deal with anyone who steps out of line. Keep order. Owens took another step forward, his voice a quiet storm of intensity. Or abuse your power to terrorize someone who can't fight back. I know you, Officer Copeland. This isn't your first dance with misconduct. I've seen your record complaints of excessive force, harassment, a trail of victims stretching back years. You've dodged the consequences before, but not today. His words hit like a sledgehammer, each one cracking the fouet Copeland clung to. The officer's face flushed a deeper red, his fists clenching at his sides as he roared, You don't know a damn thing about me. Oh, I know plenty, Owens replied, his tone cold and cutting. I've stood for your victims before. I know how you wield that badge like a club, crushing anyone who dares to defy you. But this time, you're not just facing Ellie Taylor. You're facing the law itself, and I'll see to it that justice catches up with you. Ellie stared at Owens, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and relief. His words were a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. The crowd tightened around them, their voices rising in a chorus of dissent. We saw it all. An older man shouted, his voice rough with conviction. You had no right to act like that. A woman waved her phone, still recording, her eyes fierce. We'll testify, she called out, her words a promise that echoed through the gathering. Copeland took a faltering step back, his gaze darting wildly between Ellie Owens and the onlookers. His confidence crumbled, but he clung to the last threads of his defiance. Don't think this is over, he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. You won't get away with this. But as he turned and stormed off, the weight of his words felt hollow. Ellie held Lily close, her eyes tracing the path of his retreat. She knew this was only the first chapter of a long fight, but with Owens by her side and the crowd's support ringing in her ears, she felt something new, strength. Justice wasn't just a distant hope, it was a force gathering momentum, ready to topple those who abused their power. And in that moment, she vowed to see it through, no matter the cost. The air crackled with tension as Officer Copeland's voice sliced through the quiet park. Sharp and menacing. I'll deal with this my way, he snarled, his words dripping with unchecked authority. His broad shoulders squared, and his eyes glinted with a dangerous certainty that made the onlookers shift uncomfortably. But Derek Owens stepped forward undeterred, planting himself like an unyielding oak between Copeland and his target. You need to leave, Owens said, his tone low but resonating with a quiet, commanding strength that seemed to ripple through the gathered crowd. Every move you make right now is being recorded. Keep pushing, and you're only carving out a deeper hole for yourself. His words hung heavy in the air, a warning wrapped in calm resolve. Copeland froze, his jaw tightening as his gaze darted wildly around the park. The weight of dozens of eyes bore down on him, neighbors, strangers, even a few children clutching their parents' hands, each one a silent judge in this unfolding drama. He was a man accustomed to bending situations to his will, but now, trapped beneath the scrutiny of the crowd and Owens's unflinching stare, he felt the ground slipping beneath him. His chest heaved with frustration, his mind racing for a way to claw back control. But there was none to be found. "This isn't over," he muttered through gritted teeth, his voice a low growl of wounded pride. With a final glare that promised retribution, he turned on his heel and stormed off, his heavy boots thudding against the grass as if each step was a declaration of war. Ellie stood a few feet away, her breath escaping in a slow, trembling exhale as the knot of fear in her chest began to loosen. The park, with its rustling leaves and distant hum of traffic, seemed to sigh along with her. She turned to Owens, her hazel eyes shimmering with a mix of relief and something deeper gratitude that felt almost too big to voice. "Thank you," she said, her words soft but thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." Her hands fidgeted at her sides, betraying the storm of nerves still swirling within her. Owens met her gaze, his stern features softening just enough to offer reassurance. "Don't thank me," he replied, his voice steady and warm, like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. "Thank yourself for holding your ground. But it's only the start. We've got a long fight ahead, and I'm with you to see it through to make sure he answers for what he's done." Ellie nodded, drawing strength from the conviction in his words. She glanced down at her daughter, Lily, whose small hand gripped hers with a fierce, innocent trust. The 6-year-old's wide, curious eyes scanned the scene, oblivious to the larger battle her mother had just stepped into. A wave of love crashed over Ellie, fierce and protective, rising from the depths of her soul. She squeezed Lily's hand gently, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled courage from the warmth of that tiny connection. Lifting her head, Ellie's expression hardened, her resolve sharpening like a blade. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady now, carrying a newfound weight that surprised even her. Owens gave a single nod, a silent pact forged between them. "Good," he said, his tone measured but firm. "It won't be easy, though. Men like Copeland don't slink away quietly. He'll fight tooth and nail to keep his secrets buried. But I believe you've got the strength to face him for yourself and for her." He tilted his head toward Lily, acknowledging the unspoken stakes. Ellie met his eyes again, and this time, it wasn't just gratitude that passed between them, it was trust. The world beyond the park might be a shadowed, daunting place, but here, in this moment, she wasn't alone. She had an ally, a steady presence willing to stand shoulder to shoulder against the darkness. "What do we do next?" she asked, her voice firm but laced with a flicker of eager anticipation, like someone stepping onto a path they'd never dared to tread before. Owens didn't hesitate. "We start digging," he said, his words deliberate. "Evidence records, witnesses, anything we can use to build a case. The truth has power, Ellie, even when it's been hidden for years. Especially then." She nodded again, her gaze drifting back to Lily. Her daughter's small hand anchored her, a tether to the reason she'd fight with everything she had. A quiet hope sparked within her, fragile but growing, a flame that burned brighter with each breath she took. Whatever lay ahead, she'd face it for justice, for herself, and for the future she owed her little girl. Days later, the spark of that hope flared into something bigger. A video from that tense park confrontation hit social media, spreading like wildfire across screens and igniting a storm of outrage. The footage was stark and undeniable, Copeland's hand cracking across Ellie's cheek, her sharp, defiant response cutting through his bluster. Within hours, hashtags like Justice Forley and End Policibus erupted, trending as thousands shared the clip, their comments a chorus of fury and solidarity. "This is beyond wrong and abuse of power we can't ignore," one user typed. Their words echoed by countless others. Messages flooded Ellie's inbox, a tidal wave of support from strangers who admired her courage. "You're so brave," one read. "Stay strong," urged another. But alongside the encouragement came warnings, chilling in their bluntness. "Copeland won't let this slide," one cautioned. "Be careful, he's dangerous." Each word sent a shiver racing down Ellie's spine, though she refused to let it dim her resolve. The warnings proved prophetic. A few nights after the video went viral, Ellie noticed a police cruiser parked across the street from her modest home. At first, she brushed it off as coincidence, her mind scrambling for a rational excuse. But when its headlights blazed through her living room window well past midnight, pinning her in a stark, accusing beam. She knew it was no accident. The next evening, as she tucked Lily into bed, her phone buzzed with a new message. Her stomach twisted as she opened it, the words glaring up at her in cold. Block letters, stop before it's too late. You don't know who you're messing with. Her breath caught, fear clawing at her throat. She deleted it instantly, her thumb trembling, desperate to shield Lily from even a hint of the threat. But the message lingered in her mind, a dark promise that Copeland's reach extended far beyond the park. The harassment didn't stop there. Night after night, the low hum of an idling engine haunted her street, a predator circling its prey. One evening, as she locked the front door, a scrap of paper slipped through the slot and fluttered to the floor. Ellie's heart pounded as she snatched it up, her eyes scanning the scrawled threat. This won't end well for you. The words seeped into her, cold and invasive, but she refused to let them break her. She crumpled the note in her fist, her jaw tightening. She wouldn't cower, not in front of Lily. Not ever. Still, the isolation gnawed at her, a quiet ache she buried beneath a mask of strength. That mask nearly slipped one night as she scrubbed dishes in the kitchen, the clink of plates a fragile shield against her racing thoughts. Lily padded in, her small frame dwarfed by one of Ellie's old t-shirts she'd claimed as a nightgown. "Mom," she said, her voice quivering, "there's a car outside again." Her pale face was etched with worry, her wide eyes searching her mother's for answers. Ellie's hands froze on the edge of the sink, water dripping from her fingers as she fought to steady herself. Turning, she forced a smile, warm and reassuring. "They're just patrolling, sweetheart," she said, crouching to meet Lily's gaze. Nothing to worry about, but Lily's frown deepened, her brow furrowing with a child's unerring instinct. "They keep looking at our house, Mom. Are they bad?" Ellie's heart ached at the question. She rested her hands on Lily's shoulders, her touch firm but gentle. "No one has the right to scare us," she said, her voice resolute. "And I'll always keep you safe no matter what." Lily nodded, though the unease lingered in her eyes like a shadow Ellie couldn't chase away. The world beyond their home began to shift, though. Ellie's story gained momentum, swelling into a rallying cry. Civil rights groups took to the streets, their signs bobbing outside the local police station as they demanded answers for Copeland's actions. Young activists launched a crowdfunding campaign, their voices crackling with urgency as they raised funds for Ellie's potential legal battle. One morning, after dropping Lily at school, Ellie's phone rang. It was Owens, his voice buzzing with energy. "We've got more support," he said. "Journalists want to talk to you." "This could be our chance to shine a light on everything," Ellie agreed, though a thread of unease wove through her excitement. Attention could amplify her cause, but it could also paint a bigger target on her back. That afternoon, as she and Owens pored over documents at her kitchen table, a knock rattled the door. Ellie opened it to find Mary Jenkins, the elderly woman who'd watched the park incident unfold. Her gray hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her eyes burned with a quiet fire. "Miss Ellie," Mary said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "I can't stay quiet anymore. I'll testify for you." Ellie's chest warmed, gratitude swelling as she ushered Mary inside. The older woman settled at the table, her memory sharp as she recounted every detail. Capellan's hostile glare, the slap that echoed through the park, the threats he'd hissed afterward. "He thinks no one'll stand up to him," Mary said, her wrinkled hands clenching into fists. "But I won't let him get away with this." Owens nodded, his approval quiet but firm. "Your words are gold, Mary. They'll carry weight." Even with the growing support, Copeland's shadow loomed larger. One night, as headlights pierced her bedroom window, Ellie didn't flinch. She stood tall, staring into the glare, her silhouette a defiant challenge. "We won't let them scare us, sweetheart," she whispered to Lily, who'd crept in with a question trembling on her lips. In that moment, Ellie understood the deeper lesson unfolding. Justice wasn't just a verdict. It was a stand against those who wielded power like a weapon. Copeland's abuse had ignited a reckoning, and its consequences would ripple far beyond him. A warning to anyone who dared to trample the vulnerable. For Ellie, for Lily, and for every voice rising with hers, the fight was only beginning. The flickering streetlights outside Ellie's window cast long, restless shadows across her living room, a constant reminder that her fight was far from over. Yet, with every passing day, her courage deepened. Fed by the unwavering loyalty of those who stood beside her, there was Derek Owens, a man whose tireless dedication made him seem almost superhuman. Mrs. Mary Jenkins, the elderly neighbor whose quiet wisdom carried the weight of years, and a growing chorus of voices from the community strangers who had become allies. Each moment that ticked by sharpened Ellie's resolve like a blade honed against stone. As whispers of her story rippled outward, they swelled into a roar. Community leaders lent their platforms, activists waved banners in her name, and even national organizations began to spotlight her struggle. Protests mushroomed in size, their chants echoing through the streets, while journalists scribbled furiously, amplifying her voice to corners she'd never imagined it could reach. Meanwhile, Owens was a force of nature behind the scenes. Day and night blurred into one as he sifted through documents, pieced together timelines, and tracked down witnesses, building a legal fortress to bring down Officer Richard Copeland. His hands moved with precision, but his mind churned with a quiet fury. He knew the stakes, not just for Ellie, but for the very idea of justice itself. One humid evening, Ellie sat on her worn-out couch, the fabric fraying at the edges from years of use. Little Lily lay sprawled across her lap, her soft breaths rising and falling in innocent sleep. Ellie's gaze drifted to the window, where the darkness beyond seemed to pulse with unseen threats. The road ahead loomed like a mountain, its peak shrouded in mist, but she wasn't alone. In her mind's eye, she saw Mary Jenkins' warm, crinkled smile, Owen's steady nod, and the flood of messages from faceless supporters online, each one a spark igniting her will. This wasn't just her war anymore. It was for Lily, for the future she dreamed of giving her daughter, and for every soul who'd ever choked on their own silence. "We're ready," she murmured into the stillness, her voice a soft ember flaring into flame, her eyes burning with a fire that refused to dim. The next morning, sunlight poured through the living room window, painting golden streaks across the faded carpet. It was a rare, fleeting moment of calm, but Ellie had no time to linger in it. She sat stiffly on the edge of her chair, facing M. Taylor, a journalist from a major newspaper whose notepad rested lightly in their lap. The air hummed with tension, but Taylor's voice was gentle, almost reverent, as they began. "Ellie, why risk everything to take this stand against Officer Copeland and the whole system propping him up? Doesn't it scare you?" Ellie's eyes locked onto theirs, unflinching, a storm brewing behind her steady gaze. "I couldn't just sit there," she said, her words cutting through the quiet like a blade. "If I stayed quiet, I'd be telling Lily it's okay to let bullies win, that we don't deserve to feel safe. I want her to grow up believing justice isn't just a word, it's something real, something we can fight for." Her voice rang with a strength that seemed to surprise even her. Leaving Taylor scribbling furiously, a flicker of awe crossing their face, Owens sat beside her, his jaw tight, ready to leap in if the questions veered too far. But Ellie didn't need saving shown this moment, her story spilling out like a river breaking free. The article hit the stands the following Monday, its bold headline screaming across the page, "Single mother takes on abusive officer in a fight for justice." It painted the scene in vivid Strokest Park where Copeland's cruelty had erupted, Ellie's fierce stand to protect herself and Lily, and the ugly truth that this wasn't his first offense. The piece peeled back the layers of a system that had cocooned Copeland, letting him dodge accountability despite a trail of complaints. When it hit social media, Ellie's story erupted like wildfire. Hashtags Justistifly, Policibus, no more silenceabased across screens as thousands shared her tale, their outrage and hope intertwining. Her fight became a beacon, coaxing others out of the shadows. Vanessa Carter, a young barista with trembling hands and a voice newly found, posted online about the night Copeland had yanked her from her car, his threats ringing in her ears just because she'd parked in a spot he didn't approve of. "I was too terrified to say anything," she typed, but Ellie's bravery lit a fire in me. Then there was Ronald Green, an elderly man with stooped shoulders and a lifetime of stories, who revealed how Copeland had tormented him for years, sneering at his modest home in a neighborhood the officer deemed beneath him. Ronald's post went viral, his shaky video of a wrinkled face and steady words adding fuel to the growing inferno against Copeland's racist reign. Amid the swelling tide of support, a crack appeared within the police department itself. Matt Daniels, a young officer who'd once idolized Copeland's swagger, felt the weight of his silence pressing down like a stone. He'd seen it all: threats, the shoves, the casual cruelty, but fear for his badge had kept his lips sealed. Now, as Ellie's story thundered through the city, his conscience gnawed at him, sleepless nights piling up until he couldn't bear it anymore. Late one evening, he slipped into a dimly lit cafe on the city's edge, his uniform swapped for a plain hoodie. Owens arrived moments later, his sharp eyes catching the glint of a USB drive on the table. Daniel's face was a map of nervousness beating at his temples, hands fidgeting, but his voice held firm. "I can't keep quiet anymore," he said, sliding the drive toward Owens. "This has everything documents showing how they've buried Copeland's messes, how he's slipped through the cracks for years." Owens' fingers closed around the USB, his expression darkening with the gravity of it. "You're doing what's right, Daniels," he said, voice low but steady. "But you know this paints a target on you." Daniels swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "I know, but I can't live with this guilt eating me alive." Owens gave a curt nod, a silent promise to shield him as best he could. When Owens cracked open the files, the rot within the department spilled out like a festering wound. Reports of Copeland's abuses had been scrubbed or rewritten. Civilian complaints vanished into thin air, and a web of officers had woven a shield around him. Ellie's blood boiled when Owens laid it all before her, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "They let him hurt people for years?" she demanded, her voice quaking with rage. Owens met her gaze, his calm a stark contrast to her storm. "That's how it's been. But now we've got the proof to tear it down." The USB, paired with park footage and witness accounts, forged an ironclad case. Owens teamed up with investigative reporters, and soon a barrage of exposes hit the press, each one peeling back more of the department's corruption. Justice, Ellie realized, wasn't just a prize to win, it was a reckoning, a consequence for those who'd abused their power too long. But Copeland and his cronies didn't go quietly. One night, a sharp crash jolted Ellie awake, heart pounding. She crept to the window and saw her car's windshield splintered into a spiderweb of cracks. A note lay crumpled on the driver's seat: "You'll regret this." Fear clawed at her chest, cold and suffocating, but she shoved it down, refusing to let it rule her. She dialed Owens, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He arrived within the hour, his face etched with concern as he set up cameras and promised to call in federal help to keep her and Lily safe. The articles kept spreading, and the public's fury ignited. Hundreds stormed the police station, their signs and abuse of power no thrust high above their heads. Ellie stepped into the fray, her heart thumping as she took the microphone. The crowd hushed, then roared as her voice carried over them. "They can try to scare me," she declared, "but they can't drown us out. This isn't just my battle, it's for everyone they've crushed. We're changing this, starting today." Cheers erupted, a wave of sound that shook the air. Lily slipped her hand into Ellie's, her tiny grip a quiet strength. Ellie smiled down at her, but inside, she braced for the long fight ahead. As the rally's noise faded, Ellie stepped off the rickety stage, her legs trembling from adrenaline. Owens waited nearby, his nod a silent salute. "You were incredible," he said, respect lacing his tone. Ellie's gaze drifted to City Hall in the distance, its stone facade a symbol of power that had failed too many. "This is only the beginning," she replied, her voice soft but fierce, her eyes alight with unyielding purpose. With Lily at her side and a growing army behind her, she knew the lesson was clear. Justice wasn't a gift bestowed, it was a fire forged through struggle, and those who abused their power would face its flames. In the heart of a community that had rallied around her with unwavering support, Ellie Taylor felt a fierce, unquenchable flame ignite deep within her soul. It wasn't just a fleeting spark of defiance. It was a roaring blaze of purpose that no amount of doubt or fear could extinguish. The path stretching out before her was shadowed with obstacle starring, jagged challenges that loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Yet she stood undeterred, her spirit steeled and her resolve unshakable. For Ellie, justice wasn't some distant, airy aspiration to be whispered about in quiet corners. It was a tangible, burning mission etched into her very being, a goal she'd claw her way toward with every ounce of strength she possessed. The following morning, Ellie strode into the courthouse, her steps deliberate and heavy with intent. Beside her walked Derek Owens, her steadfast ally, his arms laden with a thick stack of case files that held the weight of truth. His sharp eyes darted over the pages one final time, poring over the evidence and witness statements with the meticulous care of a man who knew the stakes were nothing less than monumental. Ellie's face was a mask of determination, her jaw set firm, though a faint shimmer of unease danced in her hazel eyes, a quiet tremor of vulnerability she couldn't fully suppress. Behind her, perched on the edge of a wooden bench, sat her daughter Lily, a small figure radiating innocence and unshakable faith. Lily's wide, trusting gaze followed her mother, her delicate features glowing with a mixture of pride and awe that pierced Ellie's heart like a bittersweet arrow. Across the room, Richard Copeland sat rigid in his defendant's chair, stripped of the gleaming badge that had once cloaked him in authority. His face was a stony facade, carefully composed, but his dark eyes betrayed him, flickering with a nervous energy that hinted at the unraveling of his once ironclad confidence. The courtroom itself buzzed with life, its pews overflowing with a sea of faces, Ellie's friends, her family, neighbors who'd known her since she was a child, and a swarm of reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks. The air hung thick with tension, a palpable weight that pressed against every chest, yet threaded through it was a fragile, shimmering strand of Hopian electric anticipation that justice might finally tip the scales. The sharp crack of the judge's gavel sliced through the murmurings, commanding silence as the proceedings lurched into motion. Today, the judge intoned, his voice deep and steady, we convene to address the case of Officer Richard Copeland and the allegations of his abuse of authority. Both sides will have the opportunity to present their evidence and testimonies so that we may uncover the truth. Derek Owens rose from his seat, his broad shoulders squared as he approached the podium. His voice rang out, clear and unwavering, cutting through the stillness like a blade. Your Honor, this trial is more than a single moment of wrongdoing. It's a reckoning, a stand against a system that too often lets power crush the powerless. We will prove beyond doubt that Richard Copeland didn't just overstep his authority. He wielded it like a weapon, inflicting deep wounds on Ellie Taylor and the very community he swore to protect. His words landed like stones in a still pond, rippling outward, seizing the attention of the jury and every soul in the room. On the opposite side, Copeland's attorney, Rose Callahan, stood to counter, her voice smooth but tinged with a faint quiver that betrayed her unease. She was a weary woman with sharp cheekbones and a practiced air of composure, though her gray eyes darted nervously as she spoke. My client was simply doing his job, she insisted, her tone straining for conviction. He acted in the interest of public safety, responding to a situation as he saw fit. But her words faltered, lacking the weight to sway the room, and the jury's faces remained impassive, their skepticism palpable. Derek wasted no time. With a nod to the bailiff, a large screen flickered to life at the front of the courtroom, drawing every gaze like a magnet. The video that played was raw and unfiltered, a moment frozen in time. From that fateful day in the park, there was Copeland, his broad frame looming as he stormed toward Ellie, his movements brimming with aggression. Then came the slop, a sharp, resounding crack across her cheek that echoed through the footage. Lily's piercing, terrified wails followed, a sound so raw it clawed at the hearts of everyone present, draping the room in a suffocating shroud of sorrow and outrage. This, Derek declared, his voice steady as granite, is undeniable proof. An officer entrusted with our safety turned his power into a tool of violence, striking an innocent mother before her child's eyes. Copeland's lawyer leapt to her feet, her rebuttal sharp and desperate. My client acted in self-defense, provoked by the situation, she cried. But Derek's response was swift and unflinching. The footage speaks for itself. Ellie Taylor posed no threat. His actions were baseless, brutal, and illegal. Next, Mrs. Mary Jenkins took the stand, a stout woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, and a no-nonsense air about her. She'd been at the park that day, a quiet observer turned reluctant witness. And now her voice carried the weight of unshakable truth. "I saw it all," she said, her tone firm and clear. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap as if to steady herself. That officer marched up to Ellie like she'd committed some terrible crime. She was just there, laughing with her little girl, not bothering a soul. Then he hit her hard right in front of Lily. It wasn't right. It wasn't justice. It was a man drunk on his own power, spitting in the face of decency. Her words struck deep, resonating with the jury. Some scribbled furiously in their notebooks, while others nodded, their faces softening with empathy as the magnitude of Copeland's actions sank in. Then came Officer Matt Daniels, a man who'd once stood shoulder to shoulder with Copeland in the precinct. He was a broad-shouldered figure with a weathered face and eyes shadowed by guilt. His uniform traded for a plain suit that made him look smaller, more human. As he settled into the witness chair, a heavy silence fell over the room. "I swore an oath to protect this community," he began, his voice low and somber, each word seeming to cost him something. "But what I saw from Richard Copeland wasn't protection. It was betrayal. I couldn't keep quiet anymore, not about him, not about the rot festering in our department." He produced a stack of crumpled documents, internal reports, memos, emails, each page a damning testament to a web of corruption. Complaints against Copeland had been buried, witnesses coerced into silence, records scrubbed clean. The courtroom hummed with shock as Daniels laid bare the machinery that had shielded Copeland for years. The jury sat wide-eyed, some leaning forward, others exchanging stunned glances. Copeland's face drained of color, his stoic mask crumbling as the weight of Daniels' betrayal bore down on him. When the last piece of evidence had been presented, the judge turned to the jury, his voice grave. "You've heard the case. Now, deliberate carefully and return with your verdict." The room fell into a thick, restless quiet as Ellie sat beside Lily, her hand gripping her daughter's small fingers so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her heart thundered in her chest, a wild rhythm of hope and dread, while Lily nestled closer, her warmth a fragile anchor in the storm of Ellie's emotions. 2 agonizing hours crept by, each minute stretching into eternity, until the jury filed back in. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with a stern brow and steady hands, rose to speak. "We have reached a verdict," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The defendant, Richard Copeland, is found guilty on all charges." The courtroom exploded, cheers and applause thundered through the space, a tidal wave of triumph and relief. Tears spilled down Ellie's cheeks as she pulled Lily into her arms, her body trembling with the release of a burden she'd carried too long. Derek approached, his usually stern face softened with pride. "You did it, Ellie," he said, his voice warm. "Not just for you, for everyone who's been crushed and ignored." Outside, a crowd of supporters greeted her, their voices rising in a chorus of celebration as she stepped into the sunlight, Lily's hand clasped in hers. Ellie's chest swelled with gratitude for those who'd stood by her, with determination to keep fighting. This wasn't just her victory, it was a clarion call, a spark to ignite others to rise against the abuses festering in the shadows of power. Inspired by Derek's quiet suggestion in the days that followed, she resolved to build something lasting, an organization to lift up victims, to arm communities with the tools to demand accountability. As the sun dipped low, casting golden rays across the world, Ellie felt a new purpose take root. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the dawn of a relentless journey to fight for justice, to heal her community, to carve out a future where Lily could grow up unafraid. And she'd battle on, step by grueling step, until that dream was real. That evening, as she sat with Lily in their cozy living room, the weight of the day settled over her. Lily's adoring eyes met hers, brimming with love. Yet a quiet question gnawed at Ellie's core. Would this one victory dismantle a system so deeply broken? She knew the answer wasn't simple. Copeland was behind bars, but the machinery that had propped him up still churned, and countless others still suffered in silence. A few days later, Derek arrived at her doorstep, his familiar briefcase in hand, his expression alight with purpose. With Lily playing upstairs, they sat at the kitchen table, the air between them thick with possibility. "Ellie," he began, his voice steady and earnest, "what you've done isn't just a win in court, it's a beacon. You've shown people they can stand up, even when they feel small. But this is just the start. She leaned in, hanging on his every word. We need something bigger. He pressed on. A platform for people like you, survivors of powers misusado, find support, legal help, a voice. I'm calling it Voices Unbroken, because that's what we are, unbreakable, undeniable, and loud. Ellie's eyes sparkled with the promise of it, a future where justice wasn't a fluke but a force. A lesson carved deep: when power overreaches, consequences must follow, or the scales will never balance. The words lingered in the air like a melody that refused to fade, striking a chord deep within Ellie's soul. Voices Unbroken wasn't just an meet, was a vow, a solemn commitment that pulsed through her veins. It wasn't only for herself, but for Lily, her daughter, and for the countless others in their community who had been silenced by fear and injustice. Ellie's head tilted in a slow, resolute nod, her eyes gleaming with a fire that had been kindled by years of struggle. "I'm in, Derek," she said, her voice steady and brimming with resolve. "I want to do this. No one should ever have to endure what I did, feeling so utterly alone." Without a moment's hesitation, Ellie and Derek dove into the work ahead. The urgency of their mission fueled them as they reached out to the network of supporters who had stood by Ellie during her darkest days of trial, a grueling ordeal that had tested her spirit. Derek, with his calm confidence and wide-reaching connections, tapped into his web of contacts, calling up potential donors who might share their vision. Meanwhile, Ellie took a different path, one that spoke to her heart. She sat down with other victims, her chair pulled close to theirs in dimly lit rooms or quiet corners of coffee shops. She listened as they poured out their stories, tales of fear, shame, and resilience that mirrored her own. With every word, she encouraged them to lift their heads, to let their voices break through the silence that had held them captive for too long. Within a single month, their efforts bore fruit. They secured a small office in the heart of downtown, a humble space, but one that radiated warmth and possibility. The walls were painted a soft cream, and sunlight streamed through large windows, casting golden patches on the worn wooden floor. There was a spacious meeting room where consultations could unfold, its long table surrounded by mismatched chairs that somehow felt inviting. Next to it was a cozy nook with a sagging couch and a coffee pot that never seemed to run dry, a place where visitors could catch their breath and feel at home. They assembled a team of volunteers, each one bringing something vital to the cause: lawyers with sharp minds and sharper pens, psychologists with gentle voices and keen insights, and social activists whose passion burned bright enough to light up the darkest corners of despair. The opening day arrived like a storm breaking after a long drought. Outside the office, a crowd gathered, their energy buzzing in the crisp morning air. People clutched handmade banners scrawled with slogans like "Voices Unbroken" and "Justice for All," and their chants rose in unison, a chorus of defiance and hope. Ellie stepped onto a small wooden podium, her hands steady as they gripped the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some strangers, and felt a lump rise in her throat. "My story is just one thread in a tapestry of many," she began, her voice trembling with raw emotion, but growing stronger with every word. "I've come to understand something powerful. When we rise, we don't just shield ourselves. We become a shield for everyone around us. Voices Unbroken isn't just a name or an organization, it's a sacred promise. Your voices will echo, and we'll keep fighting for justice, side by side." The crowd erupted, a wave of applause crashing over her, and nearby, Lily stood with her chest puffed out, her young face glowing with pride as she watched her mother ignite a spark in so many hearts. A week later, Ellie was hunched over paperwork in the office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across her desk, when the door creaked open. A young woman stepped inside, her thin jacket pulled tight around her frame as if it could shield her from the world. Her name was Monica Rivera, and her eyes darted nervously around the room, her fingers white-knuckled as they clutched her purse. Ellie rose immediately, crossing the floor with a warm, unguarded smile. "Hi, I'm Ellie," she said softly, her tone a lifeline thrown into choppy waters. "How can I help you today?" Monica hesitated, her breath shallow. Before the words tumbled out in a rush, "A friend told me about this place. I don't even know where to begin, but I feel like I'm out of options." What followed was a story that clawed at Ellie's heart. Monica, a single mother to an 8-year-old boy named Javier, had been driving home one night when a police officer pulled her over without reason. The encounter had spiraled into something ugly, his voice sharp and accusing, his questions relentless. Javier, strapped into the back seat, had watched it all unfold, his small frame shaking as tears streamed down his face. "All I could do was say I was sorry, over and over, hoping he'd let us go," Monica confessed, her voice breaking. "But ever since that night, I tense up every time I see a patrol car. I feel like I'm waiting for it to happen again." Ellie listened in silence, her gaze soft but unwavering, a well of empathy pooling in her chest. When Monica finished, Ellie reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder with a gentleness that felt like a promise. "You were brave to come here," she said. "No one should have the power to shrink you down or strip away your peace. We're going to help you not just with the law, but with rebuilding the strength that's still inside you." Monica's eyes welled up, but these were tears of release, not defeat. For the first time in months, the weight of isolation began to lift. Monica's story was a stark reminder of how deep the need ran, how many lives had been bruised by unchecked authority. It lit a fire under Ellie and Derek, pushing them to widen the scope of voices unbroken. They started hosting workshops in community center scaverness rooms, with flickering fluorescent lights and folding chairs arranged in uneven rows. These were safe havens where people could unravel their experiences without the sting of judgment. Soon, they added self-defense classes, held in gymnasiums that smelled of sweat and determination, where participants learned to stand taller, to wield their bodies as tools of empowerment. They forged alliances with local lawmakers, sitting in stuffy meeting rooms to argue for policies that would rein in officers like the one who'd terrorized Monica, men like Copeland, whose abuse of power had left scars on too many lives. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a woman in another state, its envelope creased and worn from the journey. "Ellie," it read in a shaky script, "your story reached me when I thought I'd never find my way out of the dark. I used to believe I was too weak to speak, but you showed me my voice has weight. Thank you for giving me the courage I didn't know I had." As Ellie traced the words with her fingertip, a swell of pride rose in her chest, mingling with a quiet ache. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about every soul who'd been muted, now daring to sing again. Voices Unbroken was growing into a beacon, and Ellie found herself balancing its demands with motherhood. Lily, her rock, stood by her side, her faith unshakable. Together, they were a living testament to resilience, to the strength that blooms when a community holds each other up. Late one evening, Ellie sat at her desk, the office silent save for the hum of the heater. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as memories flickered through her mind, moments of despair, triumph, and everything in between. The battle against injustice stretched out before her, vast and unyielding. But with every person they reached, every tale shared, every cry that pierced the silence, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This wasn't the end of her road. It was the dawn of something bigger, a movement rooted in justice, nurtured by community, and aimed at a future where no one had to suffer in the shadows. She smiled to herself, a quiet promise forming on her lips. She'd keep going until that dream took root and flourished. From that modest downtown office, Voices Unbroken blossomed into something vibrant, a living tribute to the human spirit. Ellie and Derek poured themselves into expanding its reach, offering legal guidance, teaching self-defense in echoing halls, and organizing workshops on civil rights in cramped libraries and school auditoriums. Each letter that arrived, each story whispered across a table, only strengthened their resolve. Within months, dozens of people found the courage to stand tall, some even circling back to lend a hand. Monica Rivera was one of them. Once a trembling figure in the doorway, she now stood before groups of victims, her voice steady as she recounted her ordeal and urged others to claim their power. Ellie watched her with gratitude swelling in her chest, knowing that every reclaimed voice was a ripple in a growing tide of change. Ellie's own voice began to carry further onto television screens and panel discussions, where she faced cameras and crowds with unflinching clarity. "We're not just taking on individuals who twist their power," she said in one interview, her eyes blazing with conviction. "We're challenging a system that lets them thrive. But I truly believe that every voice we lift brings us closer to a world that's just, At her side, Lily was growing into her own. Once a scared 10-year-old clutching her mother's hand in a park, she was now a fierce young woman with a heart full of fire. She joined Ellie at rallies, spoke at small gatherings, and one day, in a high school gym, she took the stage herself. Her hands shook as she gripped the microphone. But when her eyes found Ellie's in the front row brimming with pride and encouragement, she found her footing. "I was terrified that day I saw my mom treated so unfairly," she said, her voice rising. "But she taught me fear isn't where we stop, it's what drives us forward. Every one of us can change things, even with the smallest steps." When she finished, Ellie wrapped her in a fierce hug, whispering, "You're braver than I ever dreamed, Lily." The rise of Voices Unbroken didn't go unnoticed. It drew sharp glances from those who clung to the old ways: conservative forces, interest groups, and defenders of a system that thrived on silence. But Ellie saw their resistance as proof of the movement's power. Justice, she knew, wasn't a gift handed down, it was a garden cultivated through sweat, tears, and unyielding will. And with every life they touched, every wrong they righted, they were sowing seeds for reckoning, and where the abuse of power would no longer find fertile ground. Ellie had always seen her work as a beacon of hope, a way to lift the voiceless out of the shadows. But as the organization she'd poured her soul into grew, so did the storm brewing against it. She first sensed the shift on a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the air carried a faint bite and the leaves crunched underfoot. Major donors, people who'd once clapped her on the back and called her a visionary, started pulling their support with no warning. No phone calls, no heartfelt apologies, just curt emails or stony silence. Then came the whispers online, a creeping tide of venom on social media. Posts accused her of stirring chaos, of hating the police, of being a troublemaker cloaked as a reformer. Ellie scrolled through the comments late at night, her eyes stinging from the screen's glow, feeling the weight of each lie settle into her chest like damp earth. The disruptions didn't stop there. Events she'd spent months planning fundraise, with string lights twinkling over folding tables. Community forums where people spoke through tearswear crashed by shouting protesters waving signs. She couldn't even read through the chaos. One night, alone in the office long after the city had quieted, Ellie sat hunched over her desk, papers strewn around her like fallen leaves. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. An anonymous message glared up at her. "Stop before it's too late. We know who you are. We know where you live." A shiver raced down her spine, cold and sharp, as if someone had traced an icy finger along her back. Her breath caught, but she clenched her jaw, exhaled slowly, and swiped the message away. Fear gnawed at her, but she wouldn't let it take root. Not now, not after everything she'd built. The next morning, she sat across from Owens, her steely-eyed confidant, in a coffee shop that smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon. She recounted the threat, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. Owens leaned forward, his brow furrowed, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Ellie," he said, his tone low and firm, "this isn't just a scare tactic. They want you quiet. They're afraid of what you're uncovering. But we've clawed our way too far to back down now. Watch your step, please, but don't you dare stop." His words were a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of doubt. She nodded, her resolve hardening like iron in a forge. As the organization swelled, so did the stakes. One day, a letter arrived not through the mail, but slipped under the office door in a plain envelope that felt heavy with secrets. It was from a handful of police officers, their handwriting shaky, but their words bold. They wanted her help to expose corruption rotting their department from the incubus of power that had crushed lives under its heel. Ellie sat with that letter for hours, turning it over in her hands, her mind a battlefield of hope and dread. Helping them could topple giants, but it could also bring an avalanche of retaliation crashing down on her, her team, her family. She stayed up night after night, the house silent except for the creak of the floorboards and the hum of her racing thoughts. Lily, her daughter, now a teenager with eyes that saw too much, often found her there. She'd pad into the room in her worn slippers, sit beside her mother, and just be quiet. Steady presence offering comfort without words. One evening, as the kitchen clock ticked past midnight, Ellie sat alone at the table. a cold mug of tea forgotten in her hands. The weight of her choice pressed down on her, heavy as the night outside. Lily appeared, her shadow soft against the linoleum, and rested a hand on Ellie's shoulder. "Mom," she said, her voice gentle but sure, "I know this is tearing you up, but you've always told me doing what's right isn't easy, it's dangerous sometimes. I believe in you. I know you'll choose what's right." Ellie's throat tightened as she looked up into her daughter's face, seeing strength mirrored back at her. She pulled Lily into a hug, her arms trembling as she held her close. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're why I keep going. You're my courage." That moment fueled her. At the next team meeting, held in a room thick with tension and the scent of ink and paper, Ellie stood before her weary but determined crew. She took a deep breath, her hands steady now, and declared, "Voices unbroken isn't just surviving, we're growing. We're not only fighting for today's victims, but tearing down the systems that let these wrongs fester. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and it'll test us. But together, we can do this. We will do this." Outside, the morning sun blazed, its light spilling through the windows like a promise. Challenges loomed, dark and jagged on the horizon, but hope flickered to a flame that refused to die. Voices Unbroken wasn't just an organization anymore. It was a movement, a swelling chorus of the brave and the broken, united to demand justice. Far from Ellie's world, in the fading light of an autumn dusk in Pine Grove, Marcus Thompson trudged home from basketball practice. At 17, he carried the weight of his navy blue backpack, stuffed with textbooks, and the scuffed basketball that bounced against the uneven sidewalk with a steady thump-thump. The neighborhood hummed around him, kids shrieking as they raced bikes, shopkeepers sweeping stoops. The air tinged with the smell of frying oil from a nearby diner. Marcus had just been named team captain, and his mind danced with visions of the championship game. The roar of the crowd, the swish of the net. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his mom. "Pick up milk from Johnson's, please." With a grin, he veered toward the corner store, a place as familiar as his own reflection. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, nodding at Mr. Johnson, the stooped, gray-haired owner who'd known him since he was a gap-toothed kid begging for candy. "Hey, Mr. J," Marcus called, grabbing a carton of milk from the cooler. He lingered in line, scrolling through his phone, checking tomorrow's forecast. Clear skies, perfect for practice. Then the air shifted. Officer James Davidson strode in, his boots heavy on the linoleum, his gaze sharp and cold. New to town, he hadn't bothered with the community cookouts or the meet and greets at the precinct. To him, Pine Grove was just a grid to patrol, its people faceless, his eyes locked on Marcus, tracking him like a hawk sizing up prey. Marcus paid for the milk, the coins clinking in his palm, and headed out, the carton cold against his arm, but he felt the officer's shadow trailing him. His pulse quickened, not from shame, but from the lessons his parents had drilled into him. Stay calm, be respectful, know your rights. He'd barely made it a block when Davidson's voice sliced through the evening air. "Hey, you. Stop right there." Marcus froze, hands out where they could be seen, just as he'd been taught. His heart hammered, a wild drumbeat in his chest, but he kept his face steady. "Sir," he said, his voice even despite the storm inside. Davidson closed the distance fast, his hand hovering near his gun. "There's been a robbery. You match the description," he snapped, though no call had crackled over his radio. "Hands behind your head." Marcus obeyed, his movements slow and clear. "Officer, I'm Marcus Thompson. I just got milk from Mr. Johnson's. He knows me." Davidson's eyes narrowed. "Shut up and get on the ground," he barked, yanking his weapon free. Marcus knelt, the pavement biting into his knees, his mind spinning, but his body controlled. The milk carton slipped from his bag, bursting open in a white puddle that spread across the cracked sidewalk like spilled hope. A crowd gathered, drawn by the commotion. Phones glinted in the dusk as people recorded, their murmurs rising. Mrs. Rodriguez, a Spanish teacher with a voice like warm honey, burst from the bakery across the street, her apron dusted with flour. "Officer, that's Marcus Thompson, me student," she shouted, her heels clicking as she hurried closer. Arms waving but cautious, Mr. Johnson stumbled out of his store, his cane tapping furiously. "What's this nonsense? That boy's been coming to my shop for 12 years. I just sold him that milk." His voice quavered with age but burned with indignation. Neighbors pressed in, a protective wall of familiar faces. Chen from the laundromat, Jamal from the barber shop, each one a witness, a shield. Marcus stayed still, even as Davidson snapped cuffs around his wrists, the metal cold and biting. He focused on breathing, on remembering every detail, training from his peer mediation days kicking in. Then came Sergeant Williams, a broad-shouldered veteran with gray streaking his temples. His presence a calm amidst the storm. Called by a neighbor, he strode up, taking in the spilled milk, the crowd, Marcus's steady gaze. "Davidson, stand down," he ordered, his voice a quiet thunder. "I know this kid. Captain of the basketball team. Volunteers at the center." He uncuffed Marcus himself, his hands gentle but firm, and helped him stand. "You okay, son?" he asked, his eyes searching Marcus's face. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his voice unshaken despite the ache in his wrists. "I get you're doing your job, but I'd like to file a complaint." Williams nodded, respect flashing in his gaze. "You've got that right. We'll do this proper." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped up, phone outstretched. "I've got it all recorded, Marcus. We'll back you up." The crowd rumbled agreement, and Mr. Johnson pressed a fresh milk carton into Marcus's hands. "For your mom," he said gruffly. "We'll sort this out right." As the tension ebbed, Marcus stood tall, his community a fortress around him. He thought of the kids at the center who idolized him, how his next move would shape their courage. This wasn't over, it was a spark. He pulled out his phone, dialed his parents, and took his first step toward justice, knowing the law and his people would carry him forward. Ellie and Marcus, worlds apart, faced the same truth. Power, when twisted, crushes without mercy. But their stories scream a louder lesson: justice isn't a gift bestowed. It's a fire forged in defiance, in unity, in the refusal to bow. Ellie's sleepless nights and Marcus's spilled milk aren't just scars, they're battle cries. Proof that standing tall against corruption's weight can shift the earth beneath it. Abuse of power thrives in silence, but their voices, unbroken, promise its end. In the Thompson household, the air buzzed with a mix of tension and determination as the family gathered around the dining room table, now transformed into a makeshift command center. Michael Thompson, a meticulous accountant whose steady hands had balanced countless ledgers, scribbled notes with a precision that mirrored his resolve. His wife, Diana, a high school counselor with a voice as soothing as it was firm, worked the phone, her fingers dialing numbers with purpose, each call a lifeline to allies in their fight for justice. Papers sprawled across the table, neatly printed civilian complaint forms, handwritten witness statements, and a scribbled list of contacts for the police department's internal affairs division. Amid the organized chaos, Michael rested a reassuring hand on his son Marcus's shoulder, his grip warm and grounding. "We're doing this the right way, Marcus," he said, his tone carrying the weight of a man who believed in the power of process. "Real change doesn't come from cows, it comes through proper channels, through documentation that can't be ignored." Marcus, still reeling from the incident that had upended his world, felt a flicker of pride beneath his lingering unease. His father's words weren't just a promise, they were a lesson in patience, in the slow burn of justice done right. Outside, the world was waking up to their story. By mid-morning, the rapid ping of Marcus's phone had become a symphony of support teammates, teachers, neighbors, even the school principal, whose deep voice over the line pledged unwavering backing. Social media amplified the news like wildfire, hashtags and shared videos igniting a swell of outrage and solidarity. Community organizers and civil rights advocates reached out, their messages a blend of empathy and strategy, each one stoking Marcus's growing sense of purpose. At precisely 10 a.m., the doorbell rang, slicing through the hum of activity. Sergeant Williams stepped inside, his uniform crisp but his eyes weary, trailed by Lieutenant Garcia from Internal Affairs, a woman whose sharp gaze and clipped professionalism commanded attention. They settled across from the family, the dining room table a divide between two worlds and seeking accountability, the other tasked with delivering it. Lieutenant Garcia's voice cut through the tension as she spread out a folder. "Officer Davidson's body camera footage is secured," she said, her words deliberate. "Paired with the civilian videos and witness accounts, we've pieced together a clear timeline. This isn't the first time Davidson's crossed a line." Her admission hung in the air, a quiet acknowledgement of a deeper rot. Marcus watched his parents exchange a glance, his mother's lips tightening, his father's pen pausing mid-stroke. The adults dove into a discussion of procedures and protocols, their voices a steady rhythm of determination, but Marcus's attention drifted to the window. Outside, a cluster of kids from the community center where he volunteered had gathered on the lawn, their small hands clutching signs scrawled with marker, "We stand with Marcus." Their wide eyes and earnest faces tugged at his heart, a vivid reminder of why this fight mattered. These were the kids he'd taught to dribble a basketball, the ones who looked up to him with gap-toothed grins. Their presence wasn't just support, it was a call to action, a plea to ensure they'd never face what he had. Marcus's chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and responsibility, emotions swirling like storm clouds as he turned back to the room. The doorbell chimed again, and Mrs. Rodriguez, the school secretary who'd become an unexpected ally, bustled in during her lunch break. Her arms were laden with a USB drive of additional footage and a meticulously typed statement, her round face flushed with urgency. "The school board's behind you," she said, setting her offerings on the table like a warrior laying down weapons. "We're rolling out a program to bridge the gap between students and police. Marcus, they want you to help lead it." Her words landed like a spark, igniting a vision of change in Marcus's classrooms filled with dialogue, not distrust. He nodded, the weight of her trust settling over him like a mantle. As the afternoon unfolded, the house became a revolving door of unexpected visitors. City Council member James Chen arrived, his suit slightly rumpled from a day of meetings, his dark eyes alight with conviction. He'd seen the video online, he explained, sinking into a chair with a sigh. "This isn't just a scandal, it's a chance to shift the tide. We've been drafting a community oversight proposal for months. Your story, Marcus, could be the push we need." His voice was steady, but his hands fidgeted with a pen, betraying the urgency beneath his calm. Marcus listened, imagining a future where his pain could birth something better, a system that listened, that cared. Then came Mr. Johnson, the grizzled shopkeeper who'd closed his store early to join them. His weathered face creased with decades of watching the neighborhood evolve, and his gravelly voice carried the wisdom of experience. "Back in my day, officers walked the streets, knew every kid's name," he mused, leaning against the wall with a cup of coffee Diana had pressed into his hands. "Maybe we need some of that old school connection mixed with new training to keep things fair." His nostalgia wasn't just a story, it was a blueprint, a quiet challenge to rethink how power moved through their streets. Marcus soaked in every word, his mind racing with ideas as he jotted notes for his statement to the police commission, a statement he wanted to root in hope, not hate. Diana, ever the organizer, sifted through the growing pile of documents, her fingers deftly arranging them into a timeline that told their story in black and white. "The system only works when we work it," she told Marcus, her hazel eyes locking onto his. "Every form we file, every statement we record, every step we take, it's a brick in the foundation of change." Her certainty steadied him, a lighthouse cutting through the fog of his doubts. As evening crept in, the front door swung open again, and Marcus's basketball team spilled into the room, their jerseys a blur of blue and white. Coach Wilson led the pack, his broad shoulders squared with pride. "Tomorrow's practice is for you, Captain," he boomed, clapping Marcus on the back. "But tonight, we're here to learn how to back you up for real change." The team crowded around the table, their usual banter replaced by curiosity as they pored over papers about civilian oversight boards and police procedures, their young faces creased with focus. Marcus watched them, a lump rising in his throat. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about them, about the kids outside, about every soul in their community. "This isn't just one bad day," he told his teammates, his voice low but firm. "It's about making sure our little brothers and sisters, our future kids, can walk to the corner store without looking over their shoulders. But we've got to do it right by the book, with the law on our side, His words hung in the air, a vow sealed by the nods of his friends. As night fell, the Thompson backyard transformed into a community hub. Neighbors arrived with foil trays of food lasagna, fried chicken, homemade cookies, each dish a gesture of solidarity. They swapped stories of their own brushes with power, their voices rising and falling in the cool evening air. But the real magic happened when they started planning. Ideas flowed like a river, a youth police dialogue program, with Marcus floated as a student coordinator, workshops to teach kids their rights, meetings to hold the powerful accountable. The day closed with a quiet moment, Marcus checking his phone one last time. A text from Sergeant Williams glowed on the screen. Internal affairs starts tomorrow. Davidson's suspended pending investigation. Proud of you, son. His mother found him staring at it, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Change isn't a single thunderclap, Marcus, she murmured. It's a steady rain, persistent, lawful. United, he nodded, the day's whirlwind settling into a quiet strength. Tomorrow would bring more battles, meetings, paperwork, steps toward reform, but tonight, he felt the unshakable power of a community ready to turn pain into progress. The police commission meeting hall thrummed with restless energy, every seat claimed by neighbors, activists, and curious onlookers. Marcus sat in the front row, his team captain's jacket a badge of honor, flanked by his parents and a swelling tide of supporters. The room, usually a sleepy echo chamber, now pulsed with the heartbeat of a community demanding to be heard. Police Chief Roberts took the podium, his face etched with fatigue from two sleepless days. His command staff arrayed behind him. Sergeant Williams caught Marcus's eye with a subtle nod, a silent promise of alliance. Officer Davidson's absence loomed large, his administrative leave a shadow over the proceedings. Before we start, Chief Roberts began, his voice gravelly. I want to address the gravity of what's happened. Our mission is to protect and serve all in this community. The emphasis on all rippled through the crowd, a murmur of agreement and skepticism intertwining. When Marcus's name was called, he rose, his prepared statement trembling slightly in his hands. But as he reached the podium, he set the paper aside, letting his heart take the lead. I'm not here for revenge or to tear anyone down, he said, his voice ringing clear through the packed room. I'm here for change that means something. What happened to me isn't just about one officer or one moment, it's about trust, about making sure the people who protect us see us as people, not threats. The silence that followed was heavy. Every eye locked on him as he wove his story, not just the incident, but the years of volunteering, the late nights studying, the games he'd captained. Officers in the back shifted in their seats, some recognizing him as the kid who'd coached their own children, their discomfort a quiet reckoning. Mr. Johnson spoke next, his stooped frame belying the fire in his words. I've watched this neighborhood for decades, he said, his voice rough with memory. I've seen officers who cared and ones who didn't. What happened to Marcus was wrong, but what we do next decides who we are. Mrs. Rodriguez followed, her evidence now a polished weapon, her tone fierce. This isn't just Marcus's fight, it's every kid's right to feel safe walking home. Then, a surprise, Officer Lisa Chen, a rookie with a nervous tremor in her hands, stood. I was trained to spot threats, she admitted, her voice cracking. But we need training to spot allies. Marcus isn't a danger, he's the kind of leader we should work with. Her confession broke the dam. Voices rising with ideas, advisory boards, better training, youth partnerships. Sergeant Williams unveiled a proposal, its pages thick with input from Marcus and the community cultural sensitivity training, regular engagement, a mentorship program linking officers with kids like those outside. This isn't about blame, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. It's about bridges. Marcus showed us how to turn a wound into a way forward. The commission's unanimous vote to adopt the measures felt like a victory. But the real shock came when Chief Roberts turned to Marcus. We need your voice, he said, extending a hand. Co-chair our new Youth Advisory Council. Help us get this right. As the meeting ended, Marcus found himself mobbed citizens and officers alike eager to join the cause. Officer Chen asked to volunteer at the community center. Grizzled veterans signed up for mentorship. Outside, kids from the neighborhood waited, their eyes shining. Are you gonna train the police? One asked, Bouncing on his toes, Marcus grinned. "The fear of days past fading. We're all gonna train each other," he said. "That's how we grow strong." Driving home, the Thompsons passed the precinct. Officer Davidson's empty patrol spot a silent testament to consequences. Marcus stared out the window, the lessons of justice and power sinking deep. Abuse of authority left scars, but a united community could heal them, one lawful step at a time. As Marcus felt the reassuring grip of his father's hand on his shoulder, a wave of warmth surged through him, mingling with the quiet pride he'd carried home that day. "You've handled this with a strength and maturity I don't often see, even in grown men," his father said, his voice thick with admiration, eyes gleaming under the late afternoon sun. Marcus turned to him, his chest swelling with gratitude. "That's because you and Mom taught me something bigger than anger," he replied, his tone steady but reflective. "Real change doesn't come from settling scores, it comes from people coming together to mend what's been shattered." His father nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips as they steered the car into their familiar driveway. The crunch of gravel under the tires faded as Marcus's gaze drifted across the street. There, at the community center, workers were hoisting new basketball hoops into place, their metallic clangs ringing out like a promise of something better. A freshly painted sign caught his eye, "Future home of the Youth Police Basketball League." The words stood bold against the weathered wood, a beacon of hope amid Pine Grove's slow but steady transformation. Sergeant Williams, broad-shouldered and commanding yet softened by a genuine grin, stood overseeing the installation. As their car rolled past, he lifted a hand in a casual wave, his presence a quiet reminder of the fragile bridge being built between the neighborhood and the police. What could have fractured this small town into irreparable pieces was, instead, stitching it back together on hoop, one gesture, one shared moment at a time. Marcus popped the trunk and grabbed his basketball, its worn leather familiar in his hands. He didn't hesitate, his sneakers scuffing the pavement as he crossed the street toward the new courts. Already, a small crowd was gathering bored kids with eager eyes and lopsided grins, mingling with officers who'd traded stern expressions for something lighter, more human. The air buzzed with anticipation, a hum of laughter and chatter as they prepared for the first unofficial game. It had only been 2 weeks since the police commission meeting, a tense, heated night that could have ended in bitterness, but Pine Grove was already different. The Youth Police Basketball League, born from a fleeting suggestion in that packed room, had blossomed into a weekly ritual. The community center's courts, once quiet and neglected, now thrummed with life, drawing families and officers alike into its orbit. That Wednesday afternoon, Marcus found himself at the heart of it all, though not in the way he'd ever imagined. He stood at center court, the sun dipping low and casting long shadows across the asphalt. But he wasn't dribbling or shooting, not today. Instead, he wore a referee's striped shirt, the fabric crisp against his skin, a whistle dangling from his neck like a badge of responsibility. To his left, Officer Lisa Chen knelt beside a huddle of middle schoolers, her voice sharp but encouraging as she coached them through plays. She'd been a beat cop for years, her quick wit and steady hands earning her respect. But now her dark eyes sparkled with a new kind of purpose, teaching these kids not just basketball, but trust. To his right, Sergeant Williams towered over another group, his deep laugh rolling out as he led warm-ups with an easy confidence. His team of kids bounced on their toes, their excitement spilling over despite the sweat beading on their foreheads. "Listen up," Marcus called, his voice cutting through the noise. He raised the whistle but didn't blow it, letting his words carry the weight instead. "This isn't just about the game. It's about building something: trust, respect, a team. You get that?" The player shelf local kids, half junior police cadets, nodded solemnly, their young faces etched with determination beyond their years. The teams had been mixed on purpose, a deliberate weaving of lives that might have stayed divided. In the bleachers, parents and officers sat shoulder to shoulder, their conversations drifting from small talk to real discussions about the neighborhood's needs: potholes, school funding, safety. Mr. Johnson, the weary shopkeeper with a knack for turning any gathering into a social hub, had set up a refreshment stand nearby. Officer Rodriguez's husband, recently reassigned to community policing, stood beside him, handing out water bottles to a gaggle of younger spectators, his laughter mingling with their chatter. The internal affairs investigation into Officer Davidson had wrapped up the day before, its findings cloaked in official silence, but the ripples were undeniable. New department policies had rolled out overnight. Every officer now faced a mandate: 40 hours of community engagement each month, not as enforcers in stiff uniforms, but as neighbors, mentors, friends. During a water break, Marcus caught snippets of a conversation between Officer Parker and Coach Wilson, two men who'd once eyed him with skepticism. "Kids need to see us as people first, badges second," Parker was saying, his voice low but earnest. He watched his daughter dart across the court, giggling as she teamed up with Marcus's cousin for the next game. Coach Wilson nodded, scribbling notes for a joint police school athletic program they were dreaming up together. Then Diana Thompson arrived, her heels clicking against the pavement. Fresh from a school board meeting, her face lit up as she approached Marcus, who was wiping sweat from his brow. "The district just greenlit funding for a new curriculum," she announced, her excitement barely contained. "Officers in classrooms not for security, but for mentoring. Career talks. And guess what? Your story's part of the training material now. Chief Roberts wants you to co-present at next month's Police Academy session. They're rethinking everything about community interaction because of you." Marcus paused, the towel still in his hand, letting her words sink in. Before he could respond, a murmur rippled through the crowd. City Council member Chen had arrived, and trailing behind her was an unexpected figure, Sir Davidson. The suspended officer looked different, stripped of his usual armor. His stern jaw, once set in unyielding lines, now softened with something remorse, perhaps, or resolve. He approached Marcus during a lull between games, his boots scuffing the court hesitantly. The air grew thick, the chatter fading as eyes turned toward them. "I let fear and prejudice take over that day," Davidson said, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of weeks spent wrestling with himself. "I've been thinking hard about the harm that kind of thinking does. I want to do better if you'll let me learn from you." He extended a hand, calloused and uncertain. Marcus studied him, searching the man's eyes. He didn't see the officer who'd pinned him to the sidewalk, only someone groping toward redemption. After a beat, he clasped Davidson's hand firmly. "Next week's session is on de-escalation techniques," he said. "You're welcome to join us." The games rolled on, the clatter of sneakers and the thump of the ball filling the air. Officer Chen's team erupted in cheers when shy Tommy Martinez, a kid who'd once flinched at the sight of a uniform, landed a shot and high-fived his officer teammate with a grin that split his face. Sergeant Williams beamed as his players huddled, their differences in background blurring into irrelevance. Later, as Marcus stacked chairs and folded tables, Chief Roberts approached, his silver hair catching the fading light. "We're creating a new role, a community youth coordinator," he said, his tone deliberate. "We want you to help shape it, Marcus, for when you're done with college. You've shown us what leadership really means outside." The sunset bathed the courts in hues of amber and rose, families lingering as the day wound down. Mr. Johnson, locking up his stand, caught Marcus's eye. "This is community," he said simply, gesturing to the scene. "Not us versus them, just us." Marcus watched as Officer Davidson lingered, too, crouching beside a group of kids practicing free throws. His voice was gentle now, offering pointers with a patience Marcus hadn't thought possible. Their eyes met briefly, a nod passing between theme and acknowledgement of the distance they'd traveled from that sidewalk. Showdown. Diana found her son staring into the dusk, lost in thought. She rested a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. "Sometimes the best way to fight back is to show them a better path." Marcus nodded, the truth settling deep. Change wasn't about revenge, it was about lifting each other up, step by step. Weeks later, Marcus stood before a sea of faces in the State Police Academy auditorium, the air humming with anticipation. Rows of cadets, their uniforms crisp and eyes wide, hung on his every word as he recounted his story. Beside him stood Officer Davidson, his presence a testament to the unlikely turns life could take. "It's not about being flawless," Marcus told them, his voice steady. "It's about being willing to grow." Davidson nodded, adding his own quiet admission. Bias can blind you. I learned that the hard way. They showed the body cam footage grainy. Tensabit followed it with scenes of basketball games, mentoring sessions, trust walks. The shift was stark, fear giving way to partnership. A young cadet approached Marcus during the break, her voice trembling with resolve. I grew up dodging cops, not trusting them. That's why I'm Hereto changed that. Your story makes me believe it's possible. Back in Pine Grove, the community center had become a beacon, drawing visitors from neighboring cities to study its programs. Sergeant Williams led a tour, pride radiating as he showcased the meditation room where officers and teens hashed out conflicts. Mrs. Rodriguez's Spanish class had morphed into a cultural exchange. Officers learning salsa steps alongside verb conjugations. Officer Chen, now fluent, translated at meetings, her laughter bridging gaps. That afternoon, the trust walk drew a crowd. Officers and teens paired up, guiding blindfolded partners through an obstacle course. Marcus watched as Davidson, back on modified duty, led Tommy Martinez with care. Their steps tentative but sure. Your case is going national, Chief Roberts said, clapping Marcus on the back. Departments everywhere want to learn from us. But more than that, we're healing here. The proof was everywhere. Crime dipped, tips poured in. Families requested officers by name. Mr. Johnson's store buzzed with life. Officers lingering to chat, help with groceries, listen. The security camera, once a silent witness to conflict, now captured daily acts of kindness. During a late basketball session, Marcus saw it clearest. Davidson paused a drill to show a kid the defensive stance he'd once forced unmarcusenly now. It was a lesson, not a threat. The moment hung there, heavy with meaning. Diana's words echoed in his mind. The worst moments can spark the best changes. As the ball bounced across the empty court, its echo carried hope, a rhythm of unity. One bounce at a time. Diana Thompson stood at the edge of the bustling community center, her eyes tracing the lively scene unfolding before her. She had just wrapped up an exhausting yet exhilarating meeting, one where she'd passionately argued for extending their transformative program to neighboring districts. The air buzzed with a sense of possibility, and as she watched the crowd, a swell of pride rose in her chest. She thought of her son, Marcus, and the countless hours he'd poured into this effort. Turning to him later that evening, she'd say with a voice thick with emotion, "Your father and I couldn't be prouder of how you've steered this change." Her words carried the weight of a mother who'd seen her child turn fear into something extraordinary. The day's events wound down with a fresh ritual that had quickly woven itself into the fabric of Pine Grove, the community circle. Under the fading light of a warm spring sky, officers, teenagers, and residents gathered on folding chairs arranged in a wide, imperfect ring. The chatter was a mix of nervous excitement and genuine warmth as they shared their triumphs and worries. Officer Chen, her face glowing with quiet pride, stood to announce her promotion to community liaison, a role she'd earned through tireless dedication. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, betraying the depth of her gratitude for the trust placed in her. Nearby, Tommy Martinez, a lanky teen with a shy grin, puffed out his chest as he boasted about his improved grades. "It's all thanks to the homework help at the center," he said, his voice cracking with a mix of disbelief and joy. The circle tightened as Marcus rose, his presence commanding yet humble. He shared news that sent a ripple of awe through the group. The state governor had personally invited him to join a task force on police-community relations. But his eyes softened as he looked around, his voice steady with conviction. "My heart stays here in Pine Grove," he assured them. "This is where change takes root." As dusk settled over the town, Marcus walked home alone, his basketball thudding rhythmically against the pavement. He passed the very spot where, 6 months earlier, he'd been shoved to the ground by officers in a moment that could have broken him. The memory flickered in his mind, not with the sharp sting of fear or the heat of anger, but as a distant echo, softened by time and purpose. That patch of cracked asphalt, once a symbol of humiliation, now felt like sacred ground. It had ignited something bigger than himself, a movement toward understanding, a rejection of vengeance in favor of growth. A patrol car rolled up beside him, its engine humming softly. Officer Davidson, weary from a long shift, leaned out the window and raised a hand in a tired but genuine wave. Marcus returned the gesture, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They both knew the weight of what they'd built from that shared, jagged past. The car pulled away, its taillights fading into the twilight, and Marcus kept walking, the familiar weight of his basketball a steady comfort under his arm. 6 months after that fateful confrontation, Pine Grove buzzed with a new kind of energy as it hosted the state's inaugural Youth Police Leadership Conference. The high school gym, usually filled with the squeak of sneakers and the roar of basketball games, had been transformed into a sprawling exhibition space. Booths lined the walls, each one brimming with displays of community initiative posters, pamphlets, and eager volunteers ready to explain their work. Marcus, now a senior teetering on the edge of college, stood at the heart of it all, a conference co-chair badge pinned proudly to his chest. His hands fidgeted with the edges of his jacket as Governor Harris toured the facility, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She paused often, nodding with approval, and when she addressed the crowd, her voice rang with admiration. "Pine Grove has set a standard for the entire state," she declared, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. What began as a clash has become a roadmap for community policing. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat, the weight of her words sinking in. Later, he led a workshop called From Conflict to Connection, sharing the stage with Officer Davidson. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation, as they guided teens and officers through role-playing scenarios. In one exercise, a weary teenager with a skeptical frown donned a mock badge while Davidson, towering and broad-shouldered, played the part of a nervous kid. The switch drew laughter at first, then a hushed focus as the audience watched perspectives shift. Davidson's deep voice filled the space as he reflected on his own evolution. "I used to see danger lurking in every shadow," he admitted, his eyes distant with memory. "Now, I look for chances to connect." He glanced at Marcus, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes, the toughest lessons come from the people you least expect." The room hung on his words, the raw honesty cutting through years of mistrust. At the lunch break, Marcus caught sight of Tommy Martinez weaving through the crowd, his usual hesitance replaced by a newfound confidence. He was guiding a group of visiting police chiefs, his voice steady as he detailed how their peer mediation program had diffused 15 brewing conflicts in just a month. Officer Chen hovered nearby, her smile wide and unguarded, a mentor reveling in her protégé's growth. The conference reached its emotional peak during the story circle, where voices rose and fell like waves. Mr. Johnson, a stout shopkeeper with graying hair, spoke of how daily police visits to his store had shifted from tense scrutiny to warm check-ins over coffee. Mrs. Rodriguez, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, described how her students now saw officers as guides rather than foes. A surprise guest stole the spotlight that afternoon. Marcus's basketball rival from a neighboring town, a lanky kid with a competitive streak. "We need this in our community," he said earnestly, his rivalry with Marcus forgotten. "Our police could use what you've got here." Without hesitation, Marcus pulled Sergeant Williams aside, sparking a conversation that would plant the seeds for another town's transformation. Technology took center stage at one booth, where local teens guided by police IT specialists unveiled a community app they'd built from scratch. Officer Parker, a weary man with a quick laugh, demonstrated its features with enthusiasm. Residents could message their neighborhood officers, flag concerns, or plan events like the midnight basketball games that had slashed youth trouble in hotspots. "It's simple," Parker said, tapping the screen, "but it's brought us closer than ever." Across the room, Diana Thompson hosted a session for parents, her voice calm yet firm as she urged them to reframe tense talks about police into lessons of resilience. "Our kids watch how we handle the hard stuff," she said, her eyes meeting those of anxious mothers and fathers. "Marcus showed us that choosing to build instead of burn creates something that lasts." The afternoon spilled into a sports demo on the school's outdoor court, where Marcus refereed a game between mixed teams of officers and teens from across districts. The players moved with an easy rhythm, their past divisions dissolving in the blur of dribbles and passes. Even Chief Roberts, a stern figure with a reputation for rigidity, shed his tie and joined in. laughing as he fumbled a shot beside kids half his age. The crowd erupted in cheers. But the day's most poignant moment came when a troop of elementary schoolers took the stage. Their ply a whimsical retelling of Pine Grove's journey cast Officer Davidson as a caped superhero who discovered his true strength and kindness. From the audience, Davidson watched, his broad shoulders shaking as he brushed tears from his cheeks, the children's voices weaving his redemption into something mythic. As the conference drew to a close, Marcus and Davidson found themselves standing near the site of their original clash, the air cool and still. A news photographer snapped a shot of them laughing together, a stark contrast to the grainy image of fear that had once defined that spot. Governor Harris approached Marcus before departing, her tone both official and warm. "We're sending officers statewide to train here," she said. "But you've taught us something bigger. Change doesn't need rage, it needs vision." The evening wrapped with a community dinner in the cafeteria, where officers and residents mingled over plates of potluck casseroles, their conversations a tapestry of stories and dreams for what lay ahead. Tommy Martinez stood on a chair, announcing his plan to study criminal justice in college, his voice ringing with purpose. "I want to be an officer who keeps this going," he said, and the room burst into applause. Cleaning up later, Marcus found his old basketball in the equipment room, its worn leather cool against his palms. He bounced it once, twice, the sound echoing in the empty space. 6 months ago, he'd been a terrified kid clutching that same ball, staring down a future shadowed by anger. Now, that fear had morphed into a calling, that moment of near tragedy into a beacon of hope. Outside, patrol cars cruised by, their lights painting soft arcs across the school walls. In Pine Grove, those beams no longer signaled danger, they were a quiet promise, a sign that the guardians of this new peace were watching over a community they'd all fought to reshape. As graduation loomed at Pine Grove High, Marcus sat in his bedroom. College acceptance letters spread across his desk. Among them was a thick envelope that made his heart race. A full scholarship to State University's Criminal Justice Program, funded by the Police Officers Association and local donors. The path he'd stumbled onto had flung open doors he'd never dared imagine. That morning, Officer Davidson O. Sergeant David Son stopped by, a wrapped package tucked under his arm. "The whole department signed this," he said, handing it over with a grin. Inside was a basketball, its surface scrawled with messages of thanks from every officer on the force. Downstairs, Diana bustled about, arranging photos for the graduation party, snapshots of Marcus testifying at the state capitol, leading workshops, and standing tall at the governor's Youth Leadership Award ceremony. Channel 5's doing a special. His father called from the kitchen. "They're calling Pine Grove the miracle district where police and community became family." Marcus smiled, the taste of that miracle bittersweet, born as it was from his darkest day. At school, the halls thrummed with excitement. The senior class had dedicated their yearbook to the Youth Police Partnership, its pages bursting with images of tutoring sessions, basketball games, and unguarded moments of friendship that would have been unthinkable a year prior. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped Marcus in the hallway, her eyes misty. "You used to be scared to walk home," she said softly. "Now our kids are applying to the police academy because of you." 3 seniors, including Tommy, had already been accepted into the cadet program. At lunch, Chief Roberts' voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the Marcus Thompson Youth Leadership Scholarship, an annual award for students who bridged the gap between police and community. Marcus sat among classmates who now saw law enforcement not as a threat, but as a partner. Officer Chen arrived with more news, her excitement barely contained. 3 neighboring states are adopting our model, she told him. "They want you as a consultant this summer, your stories rewriting policies everywhere." Later, Mr. Johnson closed his store early to help set up for graduation. His security camera sent witnesses to Injusticino brimming with footage of officers and residents sharing smiles. "The best stories start with the toughest chapters," he told Marcus, clapping him on the shoulder. At the ceremony, as Marcus crossed the stage, the crowd roared, not just for a graduate, but for a young man who'd shown them that justice isn't about settling scores, it's about building something better. The lesson lingered in the air, heavy with truth. Power misused can shatter lives, but power redirected can heal them. Pine Grove stood as proof, a quiet town forever changed by a boy who chose progress over payback. As Marcus stood on the bustling street corner, his eyes caught a sight that warmed his heart in a way he hadn't expected. Officer Davidson, once a towering figure of dread in Pine Grove, was weaving through the afternoon traffic with a calm confidence. His whistle chirped in rhythmic bursts, guiding cars with a steady hand. But it wasn't just the efficiency that struck Marcus. Around him, the usual chaos of horns and hurried shouts had softened into something else entirely, a gentle hum of connection. Kids poked their heads out of car windows, their faces lit with curiosity rather than caution, waving at the officer as if he were an old friend. Parents lingered at crosswalks, exchanging a few words with him, their smiles genuine and unguarded. The man who had once cast a shadow of fear over the town now stood as a living testament to the transformation they'd all fought for, a beacon of what justice could look like when power was wielded with care. Later that day, Sergeant Williams arrived at Marcus's doorstep, his arms cradling a thick folder brimming with papers. The older man's face, etched with years of service, broke into a grin as he handed it over. "For your college project," he said, his voice carrying a quiet pride. Marcus flipped through the pages, his pulse quickening as the numbers leapt out at him. Crime rates had plummeted by 40%, a staggering drop that spoke of safer streets and steadier lives. Community tips had surged by 300%, proof that trust had taken root where suspicion once festered. And then there were the officer commendations, a record high, each one a story of gratitude from residents who'd once turned away in silence. But the statistic that hit Marcus hardest was a simple, beautiful zero, not a single serious incident between officers and youth in the past year. He stared at that number, letting it sink in, feeling the weight of what it meant, a peace forged not by chance, but by every small choice they'd made together. It was a lesson in justice, he thought, not the kind that punishes, but the kind that heals. As the sun dipped below the horizon on graduation eve, the community center buzzed with life. A special dinner had drawn everyone together, and the air was thick with the clatter of plates and the warmth of shared laughter. Officers sat elbow to elbow with residents, their uniforms blending into the crowd like threads in a tapestry. Stories flowed freely, some funny, some tender, each one stitching the room closer together. At one table, Tommy Martinez, a weary kid with a spark in his eyes, stood up, his voice trembling slightly as he began his spoken word performance. The room fell silent, hanging on his every word as he painted a picture of his past nights spent ducking patrol cars, his heart pounding with fear, and then his present, where that same fear had blossomed into a dream of wearing the badge himself. Tears streaked down weathered faces as he spoke, and Marcus felt his own throat tighten. Tommy's words weren't just poetry, they were a mirror, reflecting the power of change and the cost of clinging to old ways. Then Officer Davidson rose, his broad shoulders squared, but his eyes soft with something like humility. The chatter hushed as he cleared his throat. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady but laced with regret, "I was everything wrong with policing. I carried that badge like a weapon, not a promise." He paused, glancing at Marcus, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "You could have hated me, Marcus. You could have fought back with anger, and no one would have blamed you. But you didn't. You showed all of USA better way." His words landed like stones in still water, rippling out to touch every soul in the room. Marcus looked round, his chest swelling as he took in the facets, not officers and civilians divided by lines of power, but a single, unbroken family. His mother's hand found his under the table, her grip firm and warm. "Your revenge," she whispered. Her voice, thick with pride, was turning them into ours. That night, as Marcus hung his graduation robe in the quiet of his room, his fingers brushed against something tucked into the pocket. He pulled out a folded note, the handwriting shaky but earnest, and a photo fluttered to the floor. The note was from a freshman he'd mentored at a shy kid named Jaden, whose eyes had once darted nervously at every siren. "Because of you," it read. "I'm not afraid anymore." "Neither are they." The photo showed Jaden mid-laugh, dribbling a basketball while Officer Davidson grinned beside him. their camaraderie frozen in a single, perfect moment. Marcus held the picture, his heart pounding with a mix of joy and responsibility. Tomorrow, he'd walk across the stage, but this quiet victory was the real milestone. Pine Grove wasn't just a town anymore, it was a lighthouse. Its glow proving that the truest answer to injustice wasn't vengeance, but the slow, steady work of building something better. Out in the night, patrol cars rolled by, their engines a soft hum, and Marcus smiled. The dawn of graduation day was breaking, and it felt like a promise. The morning arrived crisp and golden, sunlight spilling across Pine Grove High School as Marcus stood before his bedroom mirror. He adjusted his cap, the tassel swaying gently for his school, silver for the police department, a delicate bridge woven from threads of trust. His reflection stared back, a young man shaped by a journey he hadn't foreseen. And he traced the path in his mind, the day that basketball rolled across the sidewalk. The weight of a knee on his back, the choice he'd made not to let anger define him. Downstairs, his parents bustled with nervous excitement, his father's deep voice calling out last-minute reminders while his mother fussed over the camera. Outside, the school grounds thrummed with anticipation, a ceremony unlike any the town had ever witnessed. Officers in crisp dress uniforms dotted the crowd, their polished badges catching the light as they mingled with parents and grandparents clutching bouquets and handwritten signs. Chief Roberts, a stern man softened by the past year, sat front and center, invited to deliver the keynote address. Beside him, Sergeant David San, promoted just months ago, beamed with quiet pride, tasked with handing out diplomas alongside the principal. The air buzzed with more than celebration, it carried the weight of wounds mended, of a community reborn. Chief Roberts took the podium, his gravelly voice cutting through the chatter. "One moment could have shattered us," he said, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "A single spark of rage could have burned this town down. But a young man chose wisdom over wrath, and because of him, we're whole." The applause erupted, loud and wild, punctuated by the whoops of kids who'd grown up in the shadow of Marcus's effort skids, who now saw officers as allies, not adversaries. When Marcus stepped up as class speaker, he carried that old basketball, its worn leather a relic of the day that changed everything. He held it aloft, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "This could have been a mark of fear," he said, turning it in his hands. "Instead, it's a tool of hope. The toughest days don't have to be endings, they can be where we start." In the front row, Tommy sat tall, his police cadet shirt peeking out from under his gown, a testament to dreams reshaped. Officer Chen, a weary woman with a sharp wit, dabbed at her eyes as Marcus spoke of fear turning to friendship. Mr. Johnson, the history teacher who'd recorded every step of their journey, nodded from his seat, his phone capturing this moment too. Then came the diplomas, and as Marcus crossed the stage, every officer stood, their salutes sharp and solemn, a vow not just to him, but to the future they'd all promised to protect. Chief Roberts stepped forward, pinning a commendation to Marcus's gown. "Champion of community change." The crowd roared, and Marcus felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as wings. The celebration spilled into the community center, where the basketball courts had been transformed into a reception hall. Photos lined the wall, snapshots of officers coaching kids, residents and police planting trees together, smiles breaking through old barriers. A corner display boasted headlines, "Pine Grove Model Goes National," a quiet triumph that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. Sergeant Davidson approached, his steps slow and deliberate, a framed gift in his hands. It was his old badge, gleaming beside a photo of them teaching a class at the academy. "You showed me this isn't about control," he said, his voice low and earnest. "It's about serving, connecting." Marcus traced the badge with his fingertip, the lesson sinking deep. Power abused breeds pain, but power shared builds bridges. The party paused as a screen flickered to life, Governor Harris's face appearing via video call. His announcement rang out, a new police-youth partnership institute, headquartered in Pine Grove, with Marcus offered a spot on its advisory board as he headed to college. Cheers erupted, and soon the crowd spilled onto the courts for an impromptu Gamma graduates and officers laughing as they darted across the hardwood. Tommy sinking a shot with Officer Chen's assist while parents and police families clapped from the sidelines. Mrs. Rodriguez, the guidance counselor who'd become Marcus's fiercest ally, pulled him aside. Her eyes shining. "The district approved our curriculum," she said. "Kids and officers learning together communication. Respect. Your marks on this place forever." Marcus grinned, the scope of it overwhelming but right. As dusk settled, he stole a moment with his parents near the edge of the crowd. His father's voice was rough with emotion. "That day they pinned you down. We could have drowned in fury. You chose a different road. San showed us all how to rise." His mother, Diana, brushed a tear from her cheek. "Your revenge wasn't settling scores. It was lifting us up, together." The night closed with a candlelight ceremony. Graduates and officers passing flames from wick to wick. A quiet dance of light pushing back the dark. When Sergeant Davidson lit Marcus's candle, their shadows merged on the gym wall, a single silhouette born of struggle and grace. As the party faded, Marcus took one last shot on the court, the ball arcing cleanly through the hoop. Outside, patrol lights flashed not a warning, but a salute. A farewell to a kid who'd turned pain into progress. Tomorrow, he'd pack for college. But his true work had already taken root. Pine Grove wasn't just a story of survival, it was a map for healing. A testament to justice that doesn't destroy, but restores one bond at a time.